Welcome back to the Ravens Chronicle. Today we have Keenan, who spent 18 months in Ukraine to do some humanitarian job and to help as well the military down there. Listen, you gotta jump on this one. You gotta listen to this podcast. It's quite interesting. He's giving his intake on how Russia and Ukraine are interacting with each other, and his intake as a sniper down there. So please tune up, like, subscribe, share, help us get bigger on the YouTube.
Are we
Welcome
recording?
back. Well, we are.
We're doing it this time. Okay, we're finally on. All right.
So we've just had 50 minutes, not 30 minutes of chatting.
Yeah.
Welcome back to the Ravens Chronicle. Okay, so today we have Keenan. Keenan, I mean, you serve in the Kenyan forces, and then you ended up on the rehab process of Veterans Affairs of Canada, and then roughly around 2022, you decided to screw this shit. I'm going overseas to Ukraine, but not with the military, on your own, which very noble of you. I mean, we have questioned up to the wazoo. You and I know each other. We eat pancake. No, is it pancake and chicken?
Chicken
No,
and
waffle
waffles.
and chicken. There you go.
Fried
But
chicken.
the conversation that you bring are always super interesting, and the perspective that you have, I find it amazing. So thank you to be with us. If there's something you want to add up that into your background, because I mean, I really put it short because I want to exponentially talk for the next hour and a half with you. But is there someone you want to add up that I didn't say?
Well, we can get into a little bit of details. Like I was infantry in the army, 2008 to 2011. I was pursuing a career for special forces. Had an interview with the admin side. After doing some testing and stuff, it was decided that I didn't have enough life experience, and it's one of the warrants at the time said the life experience I need you to have on these teams, you're not going to get in the army. And I didn't really understood what that mean until I was probably 30 years old. And just the compartmentalization and the ability to actually put rational thought behind things and realizing how much more in the world is gray and fluid and how much more you have to adapt to things in reality verse. And I see from now closer friends in special forces and my work in Ukraine within special operations communities there, how vital that is and the life experience outside military or outside ideas of combat or all the things that everybody sees about special forces is like the most invaluable part. So it was humbling at the time and not the answer I wanted to get, but in hindsight, it was probably the most valuable information or most invaluable piece of advice I ever got. And then an old injury that I had a rappelling accident in 2008 in basic training. I was able to finish the course, finish my battle school. It was just like a nuisance injury. There was a more serious part of that with ripping my dick in a harness that went for surgery and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's pretty simple.
Yeah. So, and it fucked with me mentally because I didn't have the integrity or confidence to really talk about it with anybody. So when all the army guys wanted to go out to the bar and stuff, like I just avoided it. I was like, I don't want everybody put in a vulnerable situation. Like I'm no, like, so every weekend I would just leave, go to Calgary. I just kind of became a loner, and just did my own thing. But it was really because I was just dealing with my own shit, and something I couldn't control. So then when I got to battalion, I got rolled into Charlie Company right away. We started work up for Task Force 309. And then near the end of the workup training, I started having some bladder issues and some internal issues. So they sent me to see a specialist and they said, yeah, you need surgery. So as soon as I was told that I need surgery, and the surgeon even said, he said, well, you're probably not going to need your dick overseas too much. So we could postpone this till after your tour if you need. But the Army said, no, you're getting moved over to a different position, different area. So I worked for the base commander, went for surgery, came back from surgery, moved into like the op reserve team, started training for a position with the PRT, and then was sidelined from that because of some warrant officer thought that I was just trying to play the system and I'm trying to avoid a tour because he didn't understand what I had surgery on and I wouldn't tell him, and he thought I was just trying to play the game. That I could go to the gym and work out, but I couldn't go for a ruck march. And he didn't understand that, well, I have a bandage and like a big freaking like whole lot of, I had to go for plastic surgery. I had to go for liquid nitrogen to get rid of scar tissue and like all these complex internal things at the time that I just didn't have the confidence to talk about. So that started a harassment between me and this warrant officer, and he was kind of an old school leader. And at the time, I didn't have the interpersonal skills to deal with it properly. It ended up leading to my release, and then my release was later changed to a disabled release, and I was moved in during 2012. Uh, so I released technically at the end of 2010, early 2011, and then in 2012, with the admin reviews that were done by Department of Military Careers admin in Ottawa, I was moved into a disabled status. Another admin review in 2014 moved me back under D&D, but under long-term disability. And I was supposed to return to duty, and then the plan was to go for selection, and I was excited, everything was good. And then I had to go for some physical evaluations and some testing. So during that process, they said, "Oh, what's going on here? You're having some cortisone injections in your back." And I said, "Well, yeah, it just is this nuisance problem. I got some nerve pain. They just send me cortisone injections every 4 months, but it's no big deal. I can still train and do my stuff." Uh, Cortisone was like kind of worked less and less and less. Eventually, I was referred for surgery in late 2014. So that put everything on a hiatus. I still remained under long-term disability, but I ended up having my first spinal fusion in 2015. Um, with the medical assessments that was all done, they found I had femoral acetabular impingement. I developed cysts on the head of both femurs, and it was chewing apart my labrums from the compensation and the hypermobility in the low back. I kind of had the stripper ass going on. So they ended up 2000 after the spinal fusion was stable. In 2016, they did a left hip orthoscopic reconstruction, and then January 2017, right hip orthoscopic reconstruction. Everything was good until about May 2017. All of a sudden, I started just having more problems, more problems, more problems. And they just extended the rehab program. And then there was an issue between Medavie, Blue Cross, and Manulife, who was the insurer for CISA, for the long-term disability guys. Some people are probably aware of that's part of this whole lawsuit right now that I think Simon Logan pushed forward from the unit in relation to long-term disability payments, guys losing spec pay. So that lawsuit ended up being successful, and I happened to be included in that because of my time with long-term disability. But they ended up kind of screwing over my long-term disability in January 2018, even though I was not fully recovered yet, and said, "Sorry, well, you're fit and you're too late. You don't want to return to duty. We're just going to terminate." And it had to do with a payment issue and a money issue that the DND wasn't paying Manulife properly enough to pay everybody, and it's just like some internal problem that the veterans at the end are the ones getting screwed. So contacted Veterans Affairs, was moved over into VAC and do a vocational rehab program. In June 2018, I had the second spinal fusion done, and I had the first one removed. They went in through my stomach. They did an anterior lumbar interbody fusion, and then by August 2019, I was able to compete in the Canadian Death Race. I completed about 75 kilometers, but I missed a time cutoff and didn't get to proceed through the night. But at least it was for me comforting to say 14 months after my second spinal fusion, I was, as close to 100% as I felt I was even before surgery.
Mm-hmm.
And training, I was being able to squat, deadlift, ruck. I could do everything, go sheep hunting again. And I started doing a lot of hunting and a lot of mountaineering. Just something to do. And then in Veterans Affairs said, "Okay, so what do you want to do next?" I said, "I want to go to school." And they tried to like really screw me over and say, "No, we're just going to pay for 2-year programs and diplomas." I said, "Well, I'm well aware of what the legislation is, and I'd like to do a degree in international relations." And they fought me back and forth, and I said, "Okay, well, fine. Don't pay for it. I'll pay for it out of my own pocket, out of my own savings." So I paid for it. I went to university at the University of Calgary, and I ended up suing Veterans Affairs for them not paying for what was supposed to be entitled to the vocational program. Lasted approximately 3 months. By the time we got into disclosing records and asking for things, they ultimately conceded the suit, and we agreed to settle. And they proceeded to carry on with my degree. And then 2019 was good. Did University of Calgary. 2020 was fine, and then the COVID shit started, and I refused to get vaccinated because I also have just mindfulness. Like my father died at 63 just a couple years ago from a sudden heart attack. His father died at 47. And I said, like, I'm not playing with anything with any concern without until there's a little bit more research, and there's no necessary need that I need to be vaccinated. Like I'm just not buying it. To each their own. That was my decision, and because that was my decision, I wasn't eligible to study at the University of Calgary. So they sent me home. and they didn't offer. They said, "Oh, you can do school online," but they didn't even offer 75% of the courses that you need to complete your degree online, because teachers that said, "Well, I don't want to teach anybody on the computer," and there was just all these internal problems in the university. I said, like, and really, it just aggravated like the mental health side. Like I said, like, I'm just tired of trying to work so hard to get ahead and really being like just fucked over. And I just said, like, I just need to take a break. So I took some time back. I was dealing with the separation of a long-term relationship. It was about 6 years. My ex-spouse, where I had 2 kids. Overall, most of the court stuff and the legal stuff and all the stuff with the nightmare that I dealt with before really dragged and just dwelled and burnt the relationship down. And we grew apart, and we decided, okay, we're going to sell the house and separate. So it was the best it could be in the relation to try to be amicable as possible with the 2 kids. Far from perfect, but late 2021, there was finally, everything was kind of closed. The date of the actual sale of the house was set for a possession change in February. And I'll never forget February 22nd. I was supposed to be in court to argue about this house sale, because I actually I didn't even agree to sell the house, and she was selling it for probably 75 or $80,000 under market value at the time, just to short sell it.
Mhm.
And it was like, that's $40 to $50,000 of my money. Like that's not right. And according to the Family Law Act in Alberta, we're even though I wasn't necessarily on title, I still had all my investment in the property. And the reason I didn't go on title is because we were dealing with another legal matter, and they were afraid of putting a lien on the house. So I was still invested in the house. I still had contracts. I had all the papers, I had the proof of down payment, every month for the mortgage. Anyways, February 22nd, 2022, I got a phone call from my sister in the morning, and my dog had a stroke. And it was a dog that I had since 2009, and kind of the last real attachment I had close to my dad. And dog had a stroke, and we had to go take him to get put down. So I emailed the court, and the court said, "Sorry, not our problem. If you can't be here, then we're going to proceed without you." And it was completely like just the most illegitimate court application. It was just literally lawyers pushing it through, and it's completely just shit. But because I had previous history in the course, and I took a matter to the Supreme Court in relation to something from 2013. They had barred me from the use of the court, so I had to take it to the Alberta Court of Appeal. I took it, and they wouldn't turn around the house sale. So the money sat in trust, and I did this all remotely while I was in Ukraine at the time. But February 22nd, I had the dog put down, and that was the same day the invasion in Ukraine started, when Russia moved in, and something just clicked with me, and I was like, you know what, I have to go. I have to be there. Um, Everything in life is just the way it went, and I'm free to do whatever I need to do and where I want to be. This is what I want to do. So I started organizing, and in mid to late March, I started my trip across Europe, get to Poland, and I was really kind of like, how tense is it? Like, everybody's thinking like, where's the Russians? Or is there spies? Like, who are they going to know? Like, how bad is this situation? So I went in, and I didn't. There's a lot of bad stories about the Legion at the time and all sorts of things. So I kind of wanted to avoid just diving into something without first experiencing more time there. So I went over, and I paired up with actually an old Patricia veteran that's running a humanitarian group in Ukraine that's doing a lot of good work. And they're approaching it kind of from like the ground up. I think that the group is called Hugs, and then it's grown into another group now called Hero. Anyways, there's 2 entities of it. And I did some humanitarian work, and I enjoyed it. And every time we went and did humanitarian work, a lot of time, like, it was, the gray area, like we're taking certain things to certain places that probably humanitarians shouldn't. And it's just like, it was always like, this is not really setting anybody up for anything good, right? And you see it, some of these guys show up to be medics, and they're like, yeah, we're only medics. Yet they're wearing a military camouflage pattern car, wearing a military camouflage uniform, carrying an AK in like the most hot combat zone, and they just assume like, well, no, we're medics, we're humanitarians, you can't shoot us. So the drones don't see shit, the artillery don't care, and it's just like kind of too gray and too messy to really draw the line like that. So I focused on saying, like, I want to work with professionals, I want to work with some great teams, and I worked up to another guy, and the guy that I met in Ukraine was a sniper, And I said, I did my sniper course in 2013 in the US. It's just a basic military sniper course. I did that through a contract company in the States. Um, and that's called GPS Defense at the time. And we started shooting on the range together. We started going over stuff. And I found a lot of guys in Ukraine had a lot of experience with 308s and basic ballistics, but we're doing things in really a traditional way. Not many guys knew how to use a Kestrel properly. Even the guys within their certain special operations units, there's a few areas that know all their stuff. Within SBU or SSO or in GUR, there's a few guys that know their stuff, but the dissemination of information is not being shared, and you have a lot of guys being deployed with shit that they don't have a clue. So from 2014 to 2018, 2019, most of the gear that was sent to Ukraine was medium bore, small bore, 308, 338s. And there was very few guys that were using 338s. And if they were, they had no capability of using them anywhere reasonably outside 700 meters, which is nowhere near the capability of the rifle. So I started working with the guys, and after I did the sniper course, I became a hobby shooter. Like I, shot some PRS and shot some ELR. Like I shot King of the 2 Mile and placed second place, just using a 338. And I can shoot. I can run. I understand ballistics. I can shoot. It's not a problem. There's a lot more to sniping than just shooting, but at least on that aspect, we kind of bridged the gap and started making their snipers be able to reach out and shoot better and understand how to call wind and how to. And Ukraine's very difficult. The density altitude in Ukraine is like often 1,100 feet, so the drag profile on bullets is really really high, and the terrain is relatively flat, so it's really hard to find elevated positions. And one of the interesting things when you're shooting an ELR, if you trying to find something to give an example here, but if this is the projectile that's coming out of the muzzle, it doesn't change its angle very much from the way that it leaves the muzzle. So if you want to shoot far and with low density altitudes, you have to increase your elevation because the drag on the bullet is higher. So if you want to shoot, like for example, I was shooting a PGW 50 cal, and my bullets are going into transonic flight at approximately 14 to 1500 meters with the regular surplus ammo that we're using. That doesn't really give much, great effort for any large bore calibers, because the 338s are going subsonic and transonic flight at like 900 and 1100 meters, depending on the time of year. So there's not really any real far engagements. And although 1,000 meters is a long way, when the enemy's got tanks, like you don't feel so comfortable when you're 1,000 meters from the enemy and they got a tank. And you can hear it and feel it, like it's, and they got artillery on top of it. So, so one of the issues is it's really hard to get guys to really maximize the rifle's capabilities. So we started working with those guys, working with the Ukrainian units. Met some foreigners that were with a pretty competent team within the Director of Intelligence, which is kind of their internal intel network, and we call that GUR or HUR. And they have their own foreign group of teams and stuff in their training, and really decent equipment, night vision, thermals. Not always enough for everybody, but enough that you can probably get your job done. At that time, we were working in northeast part of Ukraine in Kharkiv, which was a lot of foliage, a lot of fighting in the bush. Gave us the ability to sneak around. The area called Starosalty, we used to hunt along the river, and it's about a 1,100 meter shot across the river. But the Russians used to just hang out on the beach. They thought they were like totally safe there, and we gave them a few reminders that the beach wasn't welcome anymore. It was closed. So I think one guy, even there's one of the GUR operators that ended up whacking a guy at like 1,400 meters, and the other guys like stood around, like couldn't rationalize like how's this possible. And they just stood there, like they no flinch, no nothing, like they were just totally unaccustomed to really being engaged. Other than artillery, and the artillery you hear for the most part, unless it's literally coming right down on top of you, you won't hear it. But if you hear it, it's usually over or beside your left, and it's artillery in an open area isn't that effective, unfortunately. It's really destructive in cities. But if you're drop a mortar round, like we've put mortar rounds at 15 meters from a guy walking through a field, and like it dumps him over, and he gets up and he dusts himself off and he keeps walking. And you're just like, what the hell? He literally just looks. It looks on the drone like he crawls right out of the hole. But you realize when you see it in life, like in real life and in person, 5-10 meters is a long ways from an impact of a mortar. I'm sure he's concussed. I'm sure he's rattled. My closest call was at a gas station in Konstantinivka, just outside Bakhmut, and we took a cruise missile S-300 missile at a gas station 35 meters from us. And I had injuries on my team and casualties, and it was a mess. But it really was like, that's it. Like, it was a massive crater. It's a huge hole. It's this big boom. The gas station didn't detonate. The propane valve blew, and one guy from the gas station just ran out with a big pipe wrench and just started cracking it and closing it. I was like, that dude just got some big kahunas. That is a brave man.
No kidding, eh?
He's just a gas jockey at Ukraine, but he just knew. He's like, okay, well, if I don't shut that propane off, we're all gonna die.
Yeah, the propane explosion be worse than the rocket.
I think so. Yeah, and it just gassed, and that's the thing. Right often, if you shoot a propane tank, it'll usually gas. It doesn't detonate. So the same thing happened, and it was just this 15-foot stream of white, steamy smoke coming out of the ground, and the guy knew right away. I know what I need to do. Ran over and did it. And it was kind of ironic that day we were on our way to see a Western hospital. There were some Western volunteer medicals and surgeons that came over, and we were like going. They kind of were only treating the special operations units or the small team elements that needed help the most. And our CASEVAC plan, like if any of our guys get hit, the whole team becomes the CASEVAC, and it becomes immediately you take your guy directly from that position, 25 or 30 minutes directly to a surgical bay. And that's really the only chance you get to survive anybody, because otherwise, if you go through like the Ukrainian army system, they have guys that take a casualty, they bring them that back to like a stabilization point, which is maybe still under contact for some points and very minimal care. And then they wait until that evening to bring in like an M113 to do like a field ambulance extraction. And it's like hours and hours go by the time some of these guys get treatment. And then they go to like a shitty field hospital, and some of the people have very, very low level medical treating. And we had one guy that was really badly injured in Severodonetsk, and like blew his whole ass cheek off. And it was the fact that the medical care, that they didn't get him in for surgery, or they didn't do anything, that he ended up getting a massive infection of like a blood infection. And they had to send him to Germany. They had to send him to all these other third parties. And if he wasn't a foreigner, he probably never would have got that care. The Ukrainians, like unless you're a foreigner, you're not going to get real special care, or if you're not special.
Oh, that's really interesting.
And dude, it's frustrating because like I can send you some pictures of like even the Ukrainian like public hospital that the guys get put in, and like they just don't change sheets. There's guys with blood wounds wide open. They're chaining bandages, but they take all the like used bandages and they just take it and they just throw it in a pile. And it's like, well, this is bacteria. Like this is like you're breeding the problem. And there's just such like some of the things like their EW systems, their drones, their comm systems, better than anything I've seen even at a Western military. It's really, really inventive and just like ingenious in ways to find ways to make things work. But when it comes to like medical and administration, it's like 25, 30 years behind, if not older. And like in some of these hospitals, these are in Kyiv. Like there's no reason to be in a rush. There's no reason to have a low standard of care, other than the public facilities. The employees are paid so little, so that the best, if you don't get private care, you really don't get very good care at all.
That's really a shame that it's the Ukrainian military that's suffering at the hands of all of this, and yet all of the foreigners are getting the primo care.
Well, yeah, we have to fight for it, but it seems that there's like this PR thing that the Ukraine's maybe trying to band-aid so that there's. But even that, like it was, Dan died last year, the Navy SEAL that died from 10th, and it was other operators from the States that came over, like guys that were retired, to help get the body back and get him actually, like, even though he was deceased, but like just to even make sure he was cared for properly. It was third parties that stepped in to say like, fuck you, enough's enough. We're taking our guy and we're going to do it right.
Wow.
Like I lost a handful of guys that I'm close with there. One guy was like on my team, and he moved to another team because he had a personality conflict with a guy that I later had to fire. And that one haunts me. That one bugs me because he was just like this so eager Israeli guy that came over, and he was living in the Philippines and teaching guys, and so humble, so eager. His name was Johnny, and he just couldn't get like this. The other guy was just like personality issues, and he said like, I want to go deal with more trenches. I want to really be in the middle of it. I really want to help. And I was like, man, I've been here for over a year. Like that's not the place you go. Like, there's just, do not be eager to die in this game. It's way too easy. And he went over as a medic to another team and another organization, and yeah, he got smacked by a claymore, and they couldn't even get his body back for over a month just because he was like 300 meters from a Russian position.
Holy shit!
There's just so frustrating to be like, there's just so many little details, and like guys getting sent into the spots that they just shouldn't be sent into. And that's the thing that drives me the most nuts, is the lack of strategy that they're applying in relation to like actually managing the war. Now there's a change in command, and I'm the first one to say, like, this is the worst decision possible.
Okay, let's go for why, because a lot of people talked about it, right? But a lot of people have no clue what's going on.
I worked in Bakhmut when this commander was in charge of land forces, and he's currently still in charge of land forces right up until last week in Avdiivka. And if you look at what happens, is the Russians move on almost every position they take in a pincer movement. They take over the sides. And this fucking Neanderthal is an old Soviet-based commander, and he thinks that you need to fight over every square meter of dirt, and everybody must die over every single square meter of dirt, and even like unstrategic areas to hold. It would be strategic to hold it if somebody was doing an offensive to your left and right and pushing the enemy back. But if your offensive is not happening and you're just simply in a defensive position, and they've established a pincer maneuver around you on all sides, which means you have 270 degrees of defensive positions and only one in and out access point. There's not a single thing worth fighting in any war worth losing that many lives over to hold dirt. And the way that the Russians fight is they literally just level territories. Like, I've seen 10-story buildings come to the ground. Mariinka on the west side of Donetsk, it looks like a gravel pit. Bakhmut, there's areas there that are just flat. If you look at Avdiivka, I don't think there's a single house or any building that's not been damaged.
Wow. So it's like a scorched earth kind of tactic that they're using in the Ukraine?
Yeah, I'll send you a video from Avdiivka last about a week and a half ago, and you're talking about roughly over 1,000 artillery shells a day fired, and I'm talking like 152s. Like, we're not talking 120s or mortars, like artillery and tanks. And it seems they use their human wave idea tactics, and like the Russians seem to like push on a position from outside the city. We usually deploy guys with javelins, forward observation snipers in those positions, and as long as the building will hold. And the old Soviet concrete definitely puts up with a lot. Like, it'll eat a tank round pretty easy. You usually lose one wall and half the next wall, but if you're at least recessed a couple rooms back, you can make do. I've been in a building that got hit by a tank, and it's a hell of a fucking feeling. And it makes you second guess. Like, I think I want to go. I think I go home now.
Yeah, no kidding, eh?
I remember you mentioning, you were telling me about the wave that Russian will throw 30 guys, doesn't care
All right,
about.
so yeah, like, I'll try to get back on track there so like this commander that was in the ground force side would push his army guys into positions just to hold the territory. But for the most part, you're dealing with low-level trained Ukrainian soldiers and against Russian soldiers equally trained, shooting with predominantly AK-74s with iron sights and very little fundamentals in training. So, and there are very little of them have, maybe one guy will have like a handheld thermal that's good for about 200 or 300 meters. Like, I'm running a $12,000 Leica on the front side of my 50 cal, and I can see, even in foggy environments, I can see well out to 700-800 meters, 900 meters, and out to maybe 1,500 meters at least on a clear night when it's really cold and like nice calm. The heat signature.
Is that a thermal? Is that a
Yeah,
thermal?
a thermal, yeah. And it's I can engage effectively out to about 900 meters, as long, because you can't really put your zoom on your scope as high when you're in thermal. The magnification of it gets too blurry. So you got to play with the focus of the thermal and your zoom and your modification, and like it's a fucking shit show. So it's I wish we had inods or some FLIRs or some XLRs and like actual military grade thermals. And I've met lots of guys from State Department that have came over to help and they're like, have you seen any of this kit? And I said, nope. They said, well, we sent some. They said, well, some Ukrainian commander's probably got it in his desk. Like,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
paperwork.
it just like shit just disappears. We're like, okay, so PVS 31s, everybody's supposed to have a set, yet your whole team only gets 4 pairs. I'm like, well, what is it? The guy's supposed to like play like leading the blind person around? Like one guy's got nods and one guy doesn't?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like these little shit like this. You're just like, okay, you can't give a 10-man team 4 pairs of nods and expect the team to be effective at night.
Yeah.
It just turns into a 4-man team.
Now, would that I'm a policeman. I don't know most of the military stuff. Would that be like your night vision goggles?
Yeah, no, it's the PVS 31s are night vision. That's kind of the dual tube white phosphorus night vision that most of us are using over there. That are either like, but there's a lot of guys still running on PVS 14s, which is like a monocular, and it's more of green phosphorus.
Yeah,
it's okay. You can function with, but if you're using a monocular, you got to have usually like a PAC 4 or something on your gun to use like an IR thermal laser to shoot at night. When I'm running like PVS 31s, I can just use a red dot and I can shoot just like daylight and I can pick targets and shoot. There's Ukrainians that are literally using PVS 7s. And anybody that's ever used PVS 7s, like the old Gen 1 night vision, which is like two eyes, but in a single tube, you have very little peripheral view. It's like looking through like a toilet paper tube, and you have zero depth perception. It's like, so from a static position, they're actually quite clear and you can observe, but to move and operate with them is absolutely just catastrophic. It's horrible. And like when I see pictures being posted by the Ukrainians, like, oh, we did this raid on on the well, the sea well, like the offshore rig. And they're like, yeah, we did this raid. And there's literally a picture of a guy standing there with PVS 7s. I said, I don't, just stop publishing bullshit. Like, there's no way a dude just went through a rig in the middle of the night on a boat and then climbed a ladder and did like some cool like SEAL Team 6 shit with PVS 7s on his fucking head. Like, it just, you just make your country look nonsense when you do these nonsense things, because you're just like, hard no, just no. Like, a guy with an AK and PVS 7s, yeah, he just took over a rig in the middle of the night and like a Zodiac. Come on, stop. Just stop telling your own. And the worst part is, it's just so much bad government media. Like, and I am devout to Ukraine. I'm head of my back. I'm back in 3 weeks. I'm going back right to the shit. And I am devout for this country, but I have to call bullshit when I see it. And like, enough's enough. And because the only way you're going to beat the Russians is long term. And it's got to be strategy, and it's got to be tactful, and it's got to be based on defense. You got to bleed them out. You can't fight Russia head on when you have less numbers and less gear. And you don't need to, because even if you were to turn around tomorrow and all of a sudden the US moved in and we pushed Russia right out of the country, it changes nothing. You still have all the civil unrest issues in those areas that have been mixed blood for over almost 10 years. Yep. You have deep-rooted other cultural problems. You have deep-rooted economic issues. And the drones and the rockets don't stop. That's the number one risk to Ukraine. So the strategy and tactfulness of the war of these commanders, and this is why I'm saying this, is going back to this commander. Call him General 200. So 200 is what we say on the radio when we have a KIA. When somebody dies on the line, and you got like 300 is a wounded, 200 is killed. In Bakhmut, because it was such a fucking disaster, they called him General 200, because he just sent guys in to die. And it was absolutely appalling. And a lot of, like, when you have a guy that's a senior colonel now going in to be a general, and you have captains and majors that are like 25, 26 years old with very little military experience, blatantly, openly saying, I don't care what he orders, I will not do it. I just won't. So what happens is you end up with the commanders in the units that are well established, and there's a few good brigades like 92nd, 93rd Brigade. They're really, really well organized. They're like, hey, listen, we trust each other. We trust our commanders. We trust our team. We know how to work, and they got good gear, and they're not going to waste it. They fight back as a unit. But what the commander does is says, okay, so who else can I pay? And it just becomes like the race for the lowest bidder. Who's willing to do the work? And eventually it goes down to some eager commander that just wants medals and says, oh, I can do it with my guys. And like, this is what happened in Bakhmut. I think we had like 35 or 40 different units working in one AO. And there was maybe 4 or 5 that were actually in direct communication with each other. And
it's like policing.
Oh my God. I sat on the west side of Bakhmut, and that guy's on the radio, and I got a Terp with me. And they're like, Pitaras, which is what they say, which is kind of means faggot. But it's just what like they hear all the time when they hear Russians. They're Russian. And there's these 4 guys running down this hill. So I flip over and I'm sitting with my rifle and I look. It's about 900 meters. I'm like, they can't be Russian. Their uniforms aren't perfect, but it looks more Ukrainian than it does like clearly Russian, or it's not in multicam, which is what the Wagner guys are wearing. And I just said, like, something's not right. And there's a gunfight and there's a battle going on the top of the hill. So I was like, okay, something's not right. But these Ukrainian guys got scared of their position for whatever reason, and they just ran down the hill. So they held the key piece of ground, and they decided to run down the hill. And then they start shooting back up the hill. Well, the enemy is probably on the other side of the hill, and the trajectory of the bullets is not going to curve around the hill. And I'm just trying to figure out, like, what in the hell are they shooting at? And we're watching and watching and watching, and like maybe 45, 50 minutes later, 4 Russians come rolling out of the tree line, and one guy's standing on the radio. So boom, we throw a couple rounds in them. There's Russians that drop 2, the Russians scatter. And I'm like, and then all of a sudden, some commander goes and grabs these new guys that ran away from their position, throws them in a pickup truck, and I watch this pickup truck bombing up the hill to take these guys back to the trench that they're supposed to be in.
Oh man.
It was just like, what the hell am I watching? And then the other 2 people, there was a group from this small brigade, which is a lot of immobilized guys. It was me and one other sniper and 2 others. Like, so we had 2 spotters, 2 snipers working in a residential building, and we work under Gore. And there's supposed to be 2 other groups of snipers in there from the local brigade that's in that position. And we show up, and these 2 guys are shit-faced. There's no other 2 guys. There's 1 shooter, 1 spotter, and they have an SVD, and the closest target they could possibly shoot is about 800 meters. And they're sitting with an SVD, like a 308 Dragunov. And I'm like, what the hell are you going to shoot with that? And they get in there and they're shit faced, and I'll never forget. And like, yeah, Slava Ukraine, ahoy! And we're just like, oh my god, what is going on here? And they're literally like, what are you doing? And then it was winter. This is last December. And we look over, and there's guys in the next position, and they're having a fire in an apartment building because they're cold on the top story of the building, and they're supposed to be in an observation post. And they're like, yeah, no, but it's like, the translator explained to me, he says, no, the fire's on the back side of the building, so they can't see the light from the front. I says, your heat makes this whole building like a giant target for every tank that's looking this way.
Oh yeah, jeez.
And the next night, that whole side of that building was gone. And it's just like these little pieces of common sense and like radio discipline. And like, I wish I had a lot more good to say, but it's just, the guys working in an SSO in Gur and SPU, man, they're phenomenal. They're tier 1 level operators with more experience in combat than I think any operator in North America ever had. And they're really humble, and they're eager to learn. A lot of them have been trained by DevGru, by CAG. They've been trained by different Czech special forces. I know Kansov has spent time in certain areas training guys, and they have a lot of really good resource and help, and those guys are switched on. But the problem is there's just not enough of them.
Mm-hmm.
And there's not enough leadership to manage that level. And they only have a certain, anybody that has any kind of knowledge within special operations community, they're a tool. But if you don't have the environment to enable that tool, it can't work. Like, if you don't have the logistical support and the other support around there, like, they can only do so much on their own. And they need a lot of support when they operate, because if shit goes sideways, it goes really sideways. Like, we had one mission in Opitny, and we got support from local units. We went in, we planted, where the Russians were probably about 40 or 50 meters away in another building, and we knew where they were. So we snuck in all sneaky quiet, and we planted an IED with a mortar round, and we ran some wire over to the Ukrainian position about 200 meters away. And we were strictly going in there just to literally create some noise, so that hopefully that night or the next night, the Russians would come try to patrol in there and peek it out. Sure enough, they did. And we were in the observation point waiting for them to come into the stairwell where we had planted a couple 120 mortar rounds. And everything was set to detonate. And some Ukrainian guy got super excited. And as soon as he seen Russians out in the open, he clacked off these mortar rounds. And we're like, man, they're 40 meters away from the building still. You need to let them get in the stairwell. He just got so excited. He thought like this was going to be a nuclear explosion.
Okay, so I was very curious when John said that you were over in the Ukraine, because what I wanted to know, and you kind of answering it, it sounds like it's, pardon the language, it sounds like it's a total clusterfuck.
Completely.
So it's incredible to think that the Ukrainians are sort of holding position against the Russians, yet with this level of disorganization.
And you know what? In some ways, as much as it's like a shit show, it might actually be their superpower because their disorganization becomes normal. And it's such a snafu that I don't think the Russians could ever organize anything to actually strike against it because the Ukrainians aren't organized enough to fight against an organized defense. So
Mhm.
it's like you have, and the Russians are very organized. They don't do everything they do is very calculated, very strategic, very simple, which is probably their downfall. Is they're predictable. The Ukrainians are highly unpredictable, and they're highly resilient, and they're tenacious, and they're well layered in relation to, like, when we work in an area, you have 4 or 5 different elements within special operations groups that are over top of each other, and we're all like crossing paths, and we see guys we know, and we're like, oh hey, what's up? And it's just like, but nobody knows who each other is or where anybody actually is working unless you happen to phone the guy or catch him on signal. Nobody knows where anybody really is working or who's where. um,
Mm.
and at high level command, I'm sure they know, but there's a lot of freedom from Zelensky. There was always a lot of freedom given to the units. And it was one of my problems all the time. I was like, well, if you have this much freedom, how do you get work done properly? Because there's not a really high level of initiative in relation to a lot of the military units. They wait a lot of times for being told what to do. And by the time somebody organizes a plan, it's a little too late. Once, like, if Russia's on the doorstep and you organize a plan, you're okay. I need you to do this. It's like, well, listen, that was a week ago. We should have done that.
Mm.
And the local units don't necessarily have the initiative. So this is why you're seeing them every time they Severodonetsk, Lysychansk, Bakhmut, Avdiivka, Mariinka, a couple areas around Kherson, is areas that they were holding. They hold it for a long time, but they ultimately lose the territory. But they're inflicting like a 5-to-1 ratio of loss to Russians. Like, Russia's taking these over by just meat, like waves of meat. So now when Avdiivka falls, and my assumption is Avdiivka is going to fall this week, it'll be a tactical withdrawal for the most part. I don't see it lasting. Um, I don't have any valuable intel to share, but I think just based on what I'm looking at from what open source intelligence and guys talking is, I just don't see them holding it. I just don't see the reason to hold it either. Now that establishes, that pretty much puts like I don't know how many hundreds of miles long defensive line across Ukraine, and most of the area where they have established that defensive line is what they call the steppe, which means it's kind of flat. It's like Saskatchewan. So, with surveillance, drones, modern technology, EW, it is impossible to mount an offensive without the enemy knowing exactly where you're about to push, weeks and days in advance. Unless you literally rolled right from fucking Poland all the way right into your offensive, and your entire resup line was rolling from Poland the whole time, and nobody knew where the hell it was going, it still would probably give them 6 to 8 hours at least, right, to mount a defense. And from the position that the Russians are in, is they have a lot of resources, kind of like it's like almost built like a checkers board, where you're like, you have defensive positions all like this, and you have support positions every offset in behind them. So
Mm.
that support position can go left and right on each position, and they're kind of tiered in their support that way. And I know our HIMARS and our stuff, everybody, you see lots of strikes, and Ukraine celebrates lots of, oh, we hit this depot or we hit this supply point, and it's like, yes, but it takes them 6 hours and they've refilled it back up. Like when we were in Kharkiv, it was a 2.5 to 3 hour window. We could literally level a position, and the Ukrainian or the Russians would have new tanks, new people in it within 3 hours because they were that close to the border.
Yeah.
So unless you were good to capitalize on, take advantage of it, and you get them rolling and you get them pushed back, you look at Kherson, you look at the Kharkiv offensive all the way to Izum, they caught Russia pretty much on their heels in some ways already leaving those positions. So it was not as much as a clear offensive push and we beat them. It's been that, like, Russia was reorganizing, and they capitalized on the fact Russia was in a fluid state. But now you look at where the defensive line is, and Russia's established. And that's why you look at the Putin, the interview that Putin just did.
Constant.
Yeah, and that is the posture of a man that is very very low concern with anything.
Yeah, he seemed pretty calm and collected. I didn't watch the whole thing, but it didn't
And yeah,
really.
either, and I haven't, but it's just, I feel it's, you know, it was a narrated interview, what was allowed to be talked about, obviously.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
You're dealing with somebody that is years of intelligence operator, KGB. He's worked in politics for a good part of 20 years, and he's mastered international politics while the world is trying to cut his legs out from under him. And
Mm.
although the Russian ruble is worth nothing, the Russian economy shit, they just so deeply invested. They got $300 billion sitting in Europe that the EU is trying to tie up. Like they have money everywhere. They're not hurting. So as much as Ukraine is bleeding, and desperately asking for more resources, it's going to take decades for Russia to be in that position.
Yeah. So
And
it'll be
that's
an attrition war eventually.
well, this is I think that's every war the Soviets have ever been in has always been won on attrition.
Yeah.
Right? That's the way they beat the Nazis. That's the way that like they just genuinely can lose so much that it's
Yeah.
impossible to really. And they're willing to like if you look at the history of Napoleon, they're willing to burn their cities and leave them and give you nothing.
Mhm.
So like they're not their ego isn't necessarily always involved in the conflict itself. They're fairly tactful. Um, I think in the long run, no matter what, I think Russia doesn't come out ahead in this situation. I think um, they do lose in the long run. But the problem and the only way to create that is start creating economic tensions within their own people. So you look at the places of like Crimea and Donetsk, those areas there need to suffer humanitarian crisis. As you see in Gaza, there's nothing that destabilizes a region more. I'm sure you've seen in Syria and Iraq. Humanitarian crisis is the one thing that will break a country. It will break a military. Now,
Mhm.
it's very, very morally questionable to ask Ukraine to start targeting things in a strategic way to create a humanitarian crisis in Donetsk by water, by power, by electric, because they're technically that's their own people. But Russia's doing the exact same thing. So there's got to be this level of moral, fluidity when it comes to tactful being actually strategic in your war and what you're willing to do and what's necessary to actually get ahead. And like, unfortunately, I just don't see you winning any fight. Like everybody's going to have to fight dirty. If we're getting in a street fight, you're like, I'm not fighting fair. Like,
Yeah.
um, and war is a street fight. As much as we've established rules of conflict and all these things, and I'd love to see war actually be squared up like a sporting event and say, okay, this is your side, this is your side, this is our arena, this is where we're going to fight this out. That would have been like the historical French versus the British type war, but in modern
My
warfare,
people lost, man. I'm still sad
well,
about it.
come on, man. You were it's you're too busy running away. You can't win when you're on your heels.
Oh, I wasn't sure if we were going to bring those French jokes up or not. Oh man. Okay.
Oh, they're
Oh,
open.
we went
They're
there.
open.
We went there.
Yeah.
I wanted to, it's funny, Keenan. Have you ever done martial arts?
Yeah, I did. I fought pro in MMA, but
Oh, well, there you go. So I've been a martial artist for most of my life too. And the Ukraine sounds like the white belt fighting the experienced fighter. And you know what that's like, right? Like you get somebody who's real keen and they're
but not
just
productive.
swinging for the fences, right? And you kind of, as an experienced fighter, there's a flow to a fight, and there's not rules of the combat, but there's a way that the dance of fighting sort of is played out.
Yeah,
where
I grew up boxing, and it's the
yeah,
same. You look at
and when you
experienced
fight
boxers.
somebody with no experience, it's just haymakers from the left and the right, and they're kicking and they're swinging, and it works to a certain degree. But
And that's being said, like in a fight, it's just frustrating to deal with. But once you manage that, and once they start to wear down,
yeah,
you realize they don't have any other tools to throw at you.
yeah, exactly. Yeah,
And this is where, like, I don't. This is, politically, I'm not a fan politically of what Ukraine's doing. From the start, when they've advertised their people that this war gives them the world support, and this war gives them the justification to take back all the territory they've lost. And
yeah,
that is a very good way to motivate your country. But at the end of the day, it makes it impossible to win as a leader, because when you have to change your narrative as a leader, you've lost the faith of all your people. The second that the person in charge has to change the plan without explaining reasons, you're going to lose the faith of the people underneath you. They're going to question you. And
That's
that's
probably why he bought his house in Florida, right? He bought a
well,
house
yeah,
in
and
Florida,
this is
right?
don't get me started about dirty politics and the shit this country's got just as bad of it. So,
so
I got a
yes.
question for you as well,
Yeah.
because we talked about it when we got those waffles, and I was kind of shocked as well because I mean I was not aware of that. But men are not allowed to leave Ukraine right now, correct?
No. Now, and the new mobilization passed its first reading. It'll probably pass the second reading. And they're moving the mobilization age from 27 to 25. And people that are even below that are being forced to do military training, like sometime within a deadline. I said I'm hearing hearsay and reading reports of what I'm getting from some of the inside sources, but I haven't seen legislation to actually quote it. And once it's public and it's there, it'll be interesting to read. But there's a few things that have been advertised and publicized that are fairly authentic. And this is the one thing: is changing mobilization age from 27 to 25, mobilizing approximately 450,000. And they're also now trying to do that electronically. So everything in Ukraine, and this is we talked about really ironic, is you look at their healthcare systems, you look at their medical systems, and it's so outdated, even the usage and some of the protocols. Yet almost every Ukrainian on their phone has something called a DIA account, which is like all their COVID, all their vaccines, all their IDs, all their licenses, their passport, everything is on one program, and every Ukrainian is being mandatory required to put it on their phone. Because even if you get stopped by the police, they make you pull up that account. It's like an identity verification. It's very, very digital, like electronic verification of all your records. Well,
That's
they're trying
freaky
to
shit, man.
yeah,
That's
it's freaky. It
freaky
scares.
stuff.
I'm like, what the hell is this? Like, you of all people, like, buy into this? And the
Yeah.
Ukrainians are like, oh yeah, we like it. And like, oh, like, careful the juice you're drinking. And the government is trying to enable this app to make it mandatory for everybody, and they can be able to mobilize from that app. So if you get if you get on that app, the government can see that you've got it, and you're required to report for recruitment. And I just can't imagine the turmoil that that's going to cause in the country, because there's also many people in the older generation that don't even have a cell phone. They can't afford it. Like the income in Ukraine is very low, and people from villages, a lot of them don't have cell phones. I was in many villages in the east, and you'll talk to somebody that's kind of like a village, like the management person, and you'll talk to 4 or 5 people, and none of them will have a phone number. Hey, can I grab your number so we can come back and touch base? No, and they have a one person that has a cell phone that kind of manages everything.
Hmm.
Like he'll be a middle-aged man, and he'll manage everything for all the elderly people. Like, oh, we need water supply, like because all the elderly, they need water brought in, they need food, and like it just all goes to one person that kind of helps manage it, and that's just the way their people work, and it's efficient, but it's inefficient when it comes to actually networking with individuals.
Mm-hmm.
So, and they become a very dependent kind of group, and they're very communal that way.
So all of
Which can be good.
everybody
But
on the outside, like the entire world, is getting a story from the left and from the right. You're either getting it from Fox News or you're getting it from CNN. In Canada, you're getting it from CBC, or you're getting like some back channels through podcasting or social media. But since you've been on the ground and you've been like literally working with the Ukrainian people, is there something that you can say that would be more of a reality or more of a truth than what everybody else seems to be aware of as to what's going on with this war, and what is it about this conflict that's more true than what we're learning?
The people in Kyiv are very insulated from the combat or from the conflict completely, politically, economically, personally, emotionally. The people in Kiev, since the war ended, like since the Russians pushed, when the VDV pushed on Kiev, um, for the last 10 months, there's barely been no threat to Kiev. There's rockets and drones. But I'm telling you right now, if we walk down the main street of Krashadik and the air alarm goes off, nobody cares. Doesn't matter. Like I lived on the 11th floor of an apartment building, and almost every night we had a drone inbound somewhere in the city. And you'd wake up to the air alarm. Not a single night did anybody in that apartment building, other than maybe 1 or 2 people with young kids, left the apartment and never went to a bunker. So fear is a relative thing. And it doesn't matter how intense fear is. It doesn't matter how traumatic it is at the start. Once it becomes normal, it just becomes normal. And that's the reality, that humans normalize some of the most horrible things in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And you see that in policing, I'm sure, whether domestic violence, whatever. Humans will normalize and devalue and desensitize to almost anything.
Yeah.
And this is
That's
one
a
thing that
survival. That's like a survival
it's
mechanism, I
really,
would
yeah, it's a
yeah.
kind of, and there's also a big part of trauma, and this is something I've talked with John about, is experience and relativity. Um, and not to devalue anybody's mental trauma or PTSD or events, but one thing I do notice in Ukraine is experience has shown me the difference of something that's an immediate danger and something that is not so drastic. So the trauma associated with each thing kind of gets ranked on a scale. And you see individual or young soldiers or inexperienced soldiers that only have one or two things happen. They don't have enough dots on that scale to know where to associate that trauma, how to process it, where it should rank. Um, and that's, you look at in policing, you say really experienced police officers get in a very tense situation. Their response is often very different than the younger police officers.
Oh yeah,
Uh,
big time.
you've seen many videos of that where young guys are like all hot on the gun, and the old guy's like, "Man, I didn't even need to draw my gun. Like I'm just talking to the guy still."
Yeah.
Like it's such a contrast. So you see that in Ukraine where the experienced operators, experienced soldiers don't suffer with the mental stuff as much because there's this really, really big piece of relativity and normalcy that they've accustomed to. Not that there are other aspects of PTSD and trauma, there's still a lot of it associated with it, but their triggers are a lot different and they're not triggered by every little thing. And there maybe that's some of its culture because even the civilians that are non-military, you see them that are being accustomed to drones and rockets, and there's not a big sense of panic. Um, what's going to really be the most traumatic thing I think for the people is this: a lot of this people, the money that's being trying to be pushed into Ukraine, for the most part, it's really not to fund the military, fund munitions. It's not. It's to keep Ukraine afloat so that they don't run into civil unrest. Because even though they're not a communist country, they still run on a lot of social subsidy with the older generation,
Mm.
with pensions, public service workers. There's a lot of people in Ukraine that after the Soviet Union fell, got into public sector work and government work because it was the only sense of stability. And those people are all being subsidized and paid still by the government to maintain some quality and level of life. And people in Ukraine don't have a lot of savings. They don't make a lot of money. They're very grateful to have what they have, and they're very humble. And but they're not long-term thinkers financially because they've had this band-aid of subsidy that kind of like, okay, at 50 to 60, you take your pension and you just kind of live a lower, moderate life. Well, the inflation in Ukraine, even since my time there, the most drastic thing I've seen was on little things like water, because there's no drinkable water in Ukraine. Everybody has to buy bottled water, so it's something you see every day. You go buy water every couple days,
Mm.
and something small like this is water that's made in Ukraine. It's not imported. It's bottled water. It's clean. Um, you're looking at something that say was 12 or 13 grivna at the start of the war is now 26 to 32 grivna per
So
bottle.
almost double.
Almost double. And in some
Wow.
areas, it is double in some stuff. Gas prices are expensive. The fuel, um, rent has gone through the roof. Like I don't know how the fuck the rent is so high, but it's just the everybody's just it's like everybody's trying to make money on each other. Um, and
While
it's
they're also fighting for their lives.
yeah, it broke my heart when I first got there and I was in Lviv. And I was renting a place and I was paying $450 a month for a one bedroom, a one bathroom apartment. And the lady beside me had the same size apartment and she had a daughter with her. And she's from Kyiv. And she moved from Kyiv because of the war. She moved to Lviv to be more safe for her kids. She was being charged 890, almost $900 a month by the Ukrainians because she was from Kyiv. So she's associated that she has more money.
Hmm.
And they literally are taking advantage of their own people. And this is like a deep rooted part of the post Soviet idea. There's a lot of people that make money and live in the black. Like they try to make some cash money on the side. And now that you have a lot of auditing going on by the government and funding becoming a lot more strict, businesses can't hide the money that way. So they're forced to be kind of paying business tax proper and everything else. And all this is doing is you're watching, there's malls in Kyiv that you go and there's like 3 stores left in the mall. So the economic stuff is really on a fragile, very, very fragile place.
Hmm.
Grocery stores are still full, everything else like that. Like it's not, it doesn't look, it doesn't look like it's in a bad situation, but I'm saying that line that the government is keeping afloat is the reason why Zelensky's lost his cool so much at Davos is because I think he's literally like, if this country starts to economically fall and my people can't afford to live, and they start to run into poverty. And this is the older generation. They came from Holodomor. That's when Stalin went in and used to starve. They starved like 5 or 6 million Ukrainians. They used to come and steal all the food from the farms, from everything. If they had livestock, they killed it, and they'd take everything and feed the Soviet army. So like the Ukrainians have always been punished. And this older generation is like, there's thoughts of, I've talked to my girlfriend's like about what she talks to her grandma, and that's what they talk about. They're like, they see it. The older generation is very smart. They went through this, and then the parents and the father, like the parent generation of like, so like the guy, people in their 40s to 50s, they kind of seen Ukraine from the lowest level of poverty through the 90s, where both parents had to work, the grandparents raised the kids, and nobody ever had any extra money. Nobody had any extra money. It wasn't until like the last 10 years that people finally really got ahead. And that had to do with a lot of foreign direct investment and the liquid natural gas stuff in Crimea. And this gets into some of the internal corruption stuff that why Russia started this war is because like it took a lot of asset and a lot of money from Russia. Like that's really what that was about. And then because it was just so, I think, dirty and the way who was making money on it in the Crimea and the liquid natural gas selling it to Europe, I think that's why it never became a problem. Nobody made it public. Nobody really made a big outcry about it, even though Russia just walked in and took something from another country, is because it would have made Ukraine look very corrupt and very dirty.
Yeah.
And they didn't want their own people seeing that because that was kind of the past government's problem. That's the past government was very corrupt with Russia. So it's sad because I'm afraid of these next 6 months, honestly. Because there's no people don't pay tax in Ukraine, and their people are very protective. And the second that you even talk about the idea of implementing tax, when these people, most of them have lost their jobs and they're working less hours or less money than what they were before, and now you're going to tell them we're going to take more of your money while you're paying more for all your amenities. They're not as bad as the French to burn down the whole fucking city all the time every time they're upset, but they definitely are not afraid to protest. And like 2014 showed that. Like once their people get together, now think about Ukraine now versus 2014. You have no idea how many thousands of rockets and AKs and ammo are everywhere. Everybody has military equipment. It's fucking everywhere. I used to go sign out an AT4 for the team. Like we need to always keep one close in the car or whatever, just on missions. And it was like, oh, well, we got extra, just grab 3 or 4. And it's just like the amount of unaccounted for goods and items that are within the units is there's just insane amounts of military gear that has been improperly accounted for. And the US brought that up in numerous meetings in relation to accounting for things properly.
Yeah. Well, I think the world would like to know whether the money that's being donated to the Ukrainian war, to the conflict, is being utilized properly, or if there's a level of corruption deeper in within this, right?
So I'll go over it from like the university standpoint. Like I did a little bit of studying in foreign direct investment and international funds, part of my international relations degree. Yeah. And when you do foreign direct investment, for the most part, the person that gives that aid gets to manage it. It sits more in a trust account, in a slush account. So the only way to get it out of that account is some kind of legitimate order. And recently they caught a few Ukrainians that have been trying to do that through the MOD, saying they were buying mortars and they were trying to ultimately embezzle $40 million, and it didn't work. The CIA was literally laughing at them, right? Because like electronic and digital currency, and this is where I was talking to a guy in the States that used to work for DA, and he talked about the big push on why they were trying to enforce digital currency for government funding and keeping cash separate. Because the drug cartels and the cartels in the international network run on cash. It's easy to manage cash versus cash. As long as somebody can't take their cash and make it digital, and as long as digital can't make it cash, it's a lot easier to keep corruption clear and know which is which. Mm-hmm. So the cartels run on cash. The cartels have, look at El Chapo's house, look at these houses, they raid these houses, there's millions and millions and millions of dollars of cash. Even here, you look at drug dealers get busted, they always got thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars of cash. And it's not because they like keeping cash, it's just that the fact that they can't get it electronically. And if you can't get the money to be in electronic form, it's very hard to make it disappear or use it. Like, I don't think anybody would legally be allowed to probably buy a house purely on cash without somehow proving every single dollar and it's where it came from.
Yeah.
Like if you came from a foreign and say they came from China, you have millions of dollars, and you're like, I withdrew it from this bank, it's from this business. Yeah, maybe, but it's going to be a lot more difficult. So in Ukraine, all that currency is coming in electronic forms. I don't see anywhere. I know for a fact, and I'm not going to say where or who, but I'm sure John can relate. And we talk about different agencies and entities that have had thousands and thousands of dollars in bags in different countries in the Middle East to make things happen, right, with the locals and different militia groups. And that's unfortunately in Africa and those areas it happens.
Blood
I don't,
money.
yeah, I don't see that in Ukraine. I don't see this. I don't see. I've never seen any State Department, CIA. I've seen nobody ever trying to leverage cash in any way, shape, or form. There was talk at the start of the war of somebody that was a arms dealer for Hezbollah that was in trying to buy guns or rockets from commanders in Kharkiv, trying to smuggle like javelins and shit out of the country and buy stuff to sneak it out. Whether one or two got sold, I have no fucking idea. I don't care. But it's very low level. So most of the money I think that's being donated, a lot of that money is in relation to us just keeping the Ukrainian economy afloat and living and working. January this year, they started their debt payments. So this is what's going to be interesting is some of the interest payments started as of January this year on some of the loans I was reading. So interest starts like last year, it seems like, you get a mortgage from the bank, they give you an interest-free time or whatever, just as an incentive. But the Lend-Lease program is, I feel sorry for Ukraine for buying into something like that because it really allows another country to manage your whole country and all your resources and really get somebody like the World Bank, all these countries. Look at Africa, countries that have signed into the World Bank and they have debt or things, and it just drags the country to the bottom. The countries never seem to ever get ahead.
Well, that happened like after World War II, right? Because
You
the
see that
English and
everywhere.
French
Yeah.
had borrowed so much from America that they were just
Yep.
indebted to them for decades afterwards.
For decades, yeah. And
Yeah.
you have that other, you still see that we have economic debt between China. Like all these countries owe each other something. But when your country's not producing anything to export, and Ukraine's kind of getting screwed here because their port's getting shot, destroyed or bombed from the Russian side. And then they're trying to truck the stuff out to Poland, but a lot of people don't realize, but the Polish border is blocked. It's been blocked for fucking months. The Polish and the Ukrainians refuse because the Ukrainians are able to work for so much cheaper and they're being given an exemption to work right in Europe. So like to ship goods and services. Well, the Polish can't work for that cheap. It's not possible. They'll go bankrupt. So it's like happened in Lebanon. The Syrians moved into Lebanon after when the war started, and they're willing to work in Lebanon for a quarter of what the Lebanese will work for. And all it does is just destroys Lebanese business. So the same thing's happening in Poland is the people are moving into Poland and they're doing it for half the price or a quarter of the price. And the Polish are getting pissed off. So the Polish have put a blockade on the border, not allowing them to ship goods and services into Europe. So there's a lot of economic things on a very, very tight rope and in a fragile situation for Ukraine. And for the most part, the generation that's 25 to 30 has no recollection whatsoever because they were kids when their fathers and their mothers had to work two jobs to just make ends meet. So they have, in their adult life, they have no recollection of what hardship really means. And they've accustomed to a lot of people that have been working in the black and making money on the side and being able to kind of just buy your way through stuff or pay for something. And like that stuff's all just coming to an end. Like when State Department or anybody else gets into Ukraine and they say we need to start managing all these little bleeding holes, and they start plugging all those things get more legitimate. But when they get more legitimate, people get more pissed off. Like people are frustrated because they don't necessarily buy into it because they don't have a lot of faith because of the corruption. They're like, yeah, you're plugging all our holes, but we don't trust the government. They're still bleeding resource. So I'd say most of the money that's been sent to Ukraine, there's a lot of it sitting in trust funds and slush funds for the reconstruction and rehabilitation because that has maybe like a bit of a return on investment. The ROI on foreign direct investment, if you're going to do reconstruction and rehabilitation, could be quite high because you could bring your own companies in, you could bring your own resources in, you could ultimately maybe be make some kind of profit on the game ultimately long term.
Yeah.
But the idea of corruption, it's honestly, it's just there's a few individuals, and this is the problem. There's a few individuals who think, if I can smuggle $1 million, I can at least take care of me and my family, and I'm good. And if you're in Ukraine and you got a million slush and you got some cash, you're okay. But most of the people in Ukraine that have dirty money, they can't keep it because SBU will find it quickly and they'll just come and arrest you. SBU is incredibly integrated in every single network, and they have people everywhere.
Yeah. Well,
They're
especially if they've got a digital currency system and a digital ID
it's
system already in place, because now everything about your life is right there, right?
everything. So all of a sudden, if you all of a sudden have a G wagon, like it's going to cause some red flags. So you see a lot of these guys that, and this is maybe a cultural thing too, is they like to show their wealth. They're not as bad as the Albanians. I don't want to insult. I had an Albanian guy that I worked with in Ukraine, and he was like stereotype out of a movie. He's like, bro, I got my new chain, bro, and everything okay. Like every single cent this guy made went to clothes that he could buy to show how wealthy he was. And it was like he had no money in his bank, but he had $3,000 gold chain and a leather jacket and the nice sneakers and a new tracksuit every day. And it was just like, why don't you save some of this, man? Like he just had to advertise it. So the
Yeah,
Ukrainians aren't that stereotype, but the ones that do have a lot of extra money really like to show it. They want everybody to know they're wealthy.
yeah.
And
What?
that's a dangerous thing when you have economic uncertainty.
No kidding. Yeah.
Like it's because maybe down the road, I'm looking foresight here. You think of something like Johannesburg in South Africa. If you have money in Johannesburg, you're a fucking target for every poor person. And the amount of carjackings and the amount of like violence and street crime, because low people in poverty or bad areas in Mexico, the second they see somebody of something that they can take, they don't care. They're going to take it.
Mm.
So right
They
now,
get
there's
even lower than that, Keenan. I mean,
oh,
the
it's
best example, it's when they said that they had we were running out of toilet paper at Walmart and so on, right?
yeah.
People went nuts, but
That's just
it's
it's a
smaller
human
scale.
thing. It's just such a human trait, and it's just like everywhere I've been in the world or worked or traveled or people I've studied with and shared experience with, that the level of humanity is really similar. Humans are fucking predictable and archaic and sad in ways. And it takes a long time. And this is when I go back, it's always, you don't have enough life experience for the organization. I'll never forget the words out of the Warren's out of his mouth. And it was like, I live now learning and trying to understand life. And like, it's just, the more I learn, I'm like, it's really just not that, it's really simple. But you have to have so much experience to know how to deal with all the situations and bring people down to the bottom simple level. And I take guys in many areas. I spent a lot of time actually training specifically snipers on that psychology of warfare stuff, because you have to really, really think like a chess player if you want to live in a war. You have
Oh,
to be
yeah.
smart. And in many situations, if you don't start the gunfight, get the hell out of it. Like, do not be eager to die. And we do not have the upper hand in any situation. No matter how good your skills are, your guns are, like if you don't have the element of surprise and control, you're already on a losing ground. Um,
Mhm.
and
So
it's very difficult to teach people to really think differently. And that goes back to like looking at, for me, studying Socrates and Plato, who were kind of punished for teaching children on how to think and not what to think, which was like the enemy of the Romans. Was like, we want everybody to know what to think, how to, and what they're told, not how to critically think. And people become very dangerous when they become critical thinking.
yeah,
Oh,
Rockefeller right there.
you're opening up like the conspiracy theory rabbit hole here.
But okay, so
But
this is one
we'll
point.
see how it goes here. Hang on. Sorry, John.
So I think we use that word. It's like PTSD or trauma. It's overly used right now in general in society, right? We use conspiracy theory as a term, right, just to cover our ass. But so far, from what I've seen, it's that word have been used every time that shit is real, right? Like,
Yeah.
but we're using it as just like, okay, we're not crazy here, we're not just sharing stuff. But the fucking problem here is every time I've heard it, and then go through COVID, go through things before, so on and so forth, it turned out to be real, right? So are
Yeah,
we saying that to just protect our ass, or
yeah.
are we
Well,
saying that?
and for me, I'm trying not to go down the rabbit hole. I'm just saying, like on the surface level, if you focus on actually critically thinking analytically and as logical as possible,
Yeah.
and like even in a level of deduction of law, like reasonability, like what's possible and what's realistic, um, the second you take that away from a population, they become sheep.
Mhm.
But the problem is governments do often. You look at our education system by every means. It's not until my final year of university that I was ever asked to write an argumentative paper. I was asked to always recite information and quote information from other people, but never really argue it, never really put my input in.
Yeah.
And it's not until the high level in senior leadership or in education where people are told, I want you to find out what's wrong with it. I want you to investigate. It's like, well, that's exactly what kids do by nature. If you watch what kids do, they ask why, they investigate constantly, and they question shit. And one of my favorite things is watching this millennial generation because they're fucking defiant and they question everything and they got Google and they're like, they don't have the life experience or knowledge to bring a lot of value to certain arguments, but they do have a really good ability to open up a lot of questions. And I wish somebody would help take some of those questions and start narrowing them, because when it comes to looking at like government candidates or political candidates, or for example, we have an appointed Senate that should be fucking abolished, and go
Mhm.
into like an actual elected Senate, is that's a level of critical thinking to say, like, I want these people accountable. How do I have them accountable if I can't ask them questions and they're not required to answer? Because it's amazing how much you learn about somebody when you ask them questions. Instead of
Yeah.
just listening to them talk, but when you ask somebody questions, it's amazing what you learn.
Oh, huge. Yeah.
Or not learn.
Well, sometimes you're shocked.
Some things you don't wanna learn. You
Yeah.
said something interesting that kind of ties into what you were saying. So you were talking about how it's incredible to see the way that people treat each other when they're in times of desperation, where they'll just steal, steal, and take and take and take. If you're a prosperous person in this country, they're going to jack your car, they're going to break into your house, try to take your money. It's like there's a direct correlation of prosperity and humanity. And
Yeah.
the less prosperous you are, the less humane you seem to be. But it also ties into what you were just saying right now, is that if people are constantly in turmoil and they're like dumbed down like sheep, they don't have an opportunity to rise up, right? Because they're in this desperation mode where they don't have
It's
prosperity.
almost
They can't even think or have the opportunity to think because they're just surviving.
mhm. It's
Yeah.
like, almost a submissive mentality, and especially when you've ingrained them in the idea that they can't do anything as individuals. And this
Right.
is this is in Ukraine. I hear a lot of individuals, like, you have try to have a discussion or a debate, and they, like, literally shut it down subconsciously almost, like, as if we shouldn't even talk about it because we can't change it. It is that way. And
Yeah,
it's
it's
like,
almost like socialist programming, right?
really,
Like
really, it
you
really
you have to
is.
rely on the government.
Yeah, and this is where I'm recently in chat with a colonel from the SBU that's very well educated, worldly traveled, and he said, like, the only thing that's ever going to get this country to wake up is when people finally have to. And the only thing that does is when all of a sudden they lose something and they're forced to question what they've previously believed. But I've read some research on the CIA and the KGB start like during the Cold War. They talked about how long, and there was some stuff that came out with COVID with this, how long to miseducate a population as long as the information came from a legitimate source, how long it would take before they would believe it, and then eventually how long it would take to ever get them to not believe it, and how many could never change their mind.
So
Yeah.
that's in the
It's
book. That's in the book, eh?
It's one
It's
Yeah,
generation, right? One
yeah.
generation?
It's been quoted a few times, but it goes into the studies of a lot of these intel networks that it's scary. It's really scary on just when you start to break the psychology of a population, and then the natural nature of humanity is to become more tribal, and they kind of group together like a tribe. And the
Mhm.
second somebody leaves that tribe, they're an outcast. They're not welcome. So if
we
you're
see it here. We see it here.
we see it here, we see it in the army, you see it anywhere.
Yeah.
Like I don't know how many I've seen in every environment I've ever worked in, that it's very, very difficult to be the individual that steps out. And it is very, and I have been that person. Uh, I have guys that I literally were taking a bullet for, that the things I've heard them say about me, that literally I'd have a hard time giving you 5 cents if you're homeless just because of your character. And it's just like the way that people become communal and they group together and they become like a mob mentality, even if they're going clearly in the wrong direction. the justifications and the devaluation they come up with to just like make it normal. It's absurd. It's amazing and it's sad. And I don't know where that, if it's nature by humanity or if it's really a lot of programming from young kids, from parenting and schooling systems.
I think it's both.
I think so.
Well, because it's probably something that's definitively proven through science and theory that it's innate in us to have a tribalist, xenophobic sort of mentality, and you have to push against that in order to have cohesion in a society. We have, especially in Western, like you look at all Western cultures versus a lot of Middle Eastern and Asian cultures where there isn't these countries that are massive melting pots of multi-diverse, multicultural accumulation of people in the population, where that goes against kind of our very nature as humans. We all sort of are tribal in a way. And so it becomes very difficult and very, very easy to play upon that. Like, look at John, he's wearing a shirt that says PSYOP.
Yeah,
Well,
it was on purpose, man. I
yeah.
prefer that 'cause
Doesn't it seem apparent that there generally is a political push to separate people? There is an easy push to turn people to tribalism, like you were just saying, Keenan. It seems to be built right into us,
It is like it's something that it's somewhat. So go ahead, John.
No, French person kind of
It's
lost
like
again.
it's somewhat like almost something that is instinctually in humanity that people in leadership prey upon, and that you think you can see that in business, government, social systems. You see that within even certain friendship groups, right? With
Oh yeah.
teenagers, a different thing, right? You see this as like a humanity thing, and some of us do this, and it's like it's so rare and hard to find. And I've been blessed to have a couple leaders in the military that see that shit happening, and they immediately address it because they realize how toxic it is. But if you don't address it immediately and you don't fix it, if it's in a relationship or if it's in a business relationship or in a social environment, if you don't have strong-willed and integral people that actually can call that out and fix it, it becomes almost unchangeable once it's set.
Yeah. Well, you look at political people who vote. Like take the United States, for example. They're a two-party voting system, and people will go to their grave before voting for another political party if it was what they were indoctrinated into.
Yeah,
Even if they know, even if they're intelligent
hurts
to
them.
understand that the next leader they're going to vote for is going to destroy their country.
Yeah,
Like what did the Americans think would happen with a guy who was pre-dementia when
yeah,
they friggin' put him
yeah. It's
when they
absurd.
hired him as POTUS? Like what do you
Yeah,
think's going to happen?
yeah. Like this is foreseeable.
Yeah.
So loop back to what we are saying. So like and I've talked to John with this before. So this is kind of as much as I miss my kids, I kind of wish I had somewhat of a normal life and like the family and stuff like that. There's nowhere I feel more comfortable and at home than in the middle of the war zone in relation to both the political, the leadership, because you talk about where you have the class-based issue or the guy with the Maserati and the guy with the poor guy sees it and he just wants to take it.
Mhm.
When you have that class separation, it happens because one is privileged, one is one is suffering. Now with war, I've seen even the people with the most privilege, even though they have more money, they have more tools, they have more toys, they're put in the same situation as the poorest person. And it's amazing to see that it takes a war, although it brings out the most savage, gruesome, worst part of humanity possible, it also brings out the very best part of humanity I've ever seen. Um, and
Because
it
you get
is,
this cohesion.
yeah, and it's just, I think the human brain really only changes or adapts under two circumstances. That's either desire or necessity.
Mm.
And I think necessity is far more effective, and learning or changing or doing anything is when somebody has to. And all of a sudden, all the differences go away. And it's amazing to see. You look at any political leader during a wartime always has more support. Differences dissolve with actual real world problems and conflict.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like the most cohesive countries in the world are actually the most unstable in violence, in fighting, in conflict. And then you look at Canada with zero conflict here for the most part, and we're completely divided.
Oh yeah, good point. Absolutely.
It's
Yeah.
kind of interesting that it's a relative thing, and this is where the old quote is war is old men who know each other having young men kill each other that don't know each other.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, that's so true.
And it's really you see it at the low level. And I seen a big change in the war from one of the most kind of like heartbreaking things to watch in war is watching, unfortunately, even being sympathetic to the Russian side of young soldiers that were sent. And at the start of the war, I had some engagements with some VDV fighters and stuff, and they're fairly highly trained. And same as if me and John were sitting in a gunfight tomorrow and he goes down, his responsibility is to work on himself first. My job is ensure that I can protect him and then find somewhere else to go. I have to deal with like winning the fight first and actually establish things, and he's got to do what he needs to do as much as he can. That's trained ideology of soldiers. It's important. That's how they function. That's how they work. If he's completely dead, I am not going to stop fighting because he's dead. It makes no sense.
Yeah.
Now, as they've turned to mobilize soldiers and conscripts from jails and other areas, so you're taking guys that say they've been together a few weeks. They got together, they've been pushed into a camp or training camp, they put in a truck, they've shipped, so they've roughly spent 2 or 3 weeks together. The bond of those two people is far stronger than any other two people when it comes to their ability at a humanity level. So I've engaged somebody, I put a round through their chest at like 700 meters with a 50 cal. And there was very little chance that the man was living. Yet the man beside him jumped out and started doing CPR immediately, came out of the building into the opening after a sniper just engaged and started doing CPR on his friend.
Mm.
And it was just like senseless and mindless and like absolutely irresponsible. And I chose not to fire the second shot because I said, one, it compromises my position. And then there's a certain level of it. It was like, honestly, it doesn't serve a purpose. Whether I kill 1 or 100 today, it doesn't make a difference in this position. It's irrelevant. So my job there is to do my job, but my job is not to chase Simi Ohaya's record. And it's not a kill count or any desire I have for that. But it's shocking when you see the war changing because the level of training, the level of soldiers is changing.
Yeah.
And it's scary to think that by the end of this war, it might be like shovels and pickaxes because it's just like it's going to be just to the attrition of nothing. And by the end of it, nobody wins, nobody solves, nobody gains anything.
So what does Russia hope to have if they level all of Ukraine at the end? Just a show of might against NATO?
I don't think it has nothing to do with NATO. I think NATO is just a loudmouth fucking flapping his gums, talking like as if they have some clout in the world.
That's just the news.
It's literally just something that it's the same as the UN, right?
Yeah.
This is, for example, so Ukraine and Russia, neither are part of the World Court. The International Criminal Court of Justice has no bearing on either of them.
Right.
And they're issuing warrants for Putin. Putin could walk in the international court and they couldn't do a damn thing about it because he just doesn't buy into it. He's like, you don't have no jurisdiction. I don't. And the jurisdiction of the international court, like whether it's ICJ or World Court, is compulsory, which means it's ultimately voluntary. So the World Court is trying to leverage Russia in certain ways and said, well, they've agreed to this statute in the UN, which means they should be subject to our rulings. But really, it's just nothing but blah, blah nonsense in the media. And as if the British Empire is the one that built the UN for the most part after World War II. And if you really look at the world since World War II, there's been more conflicts in the world now than there ever was before World War I or World War II. Just smaller. And whether you're looking at they're ultimately breeding the problem because I think the UN deserves nothing more than a Facebook page. It just fucking irritates me. Like they talk about problems, and we were 3 months into the war in Ukraine, in some of the worst areas, and there was literally the news from the UN was talking about how did this happen? Where what choices should we make to make sure we can change this? It's like as if they can retroactively go back in time.
Mm.
And it's just many people in the UN are grossly uneducated in relation to actual life. They're very academically trained, and many of them have very little field experience in relation to anything that they've studied. So the UN is a root problem of a lot of this. You look at that, the UN and a blend of the European Union, and now the European Union is starting to turn on each other. Lots of places. You have housing problems in Germany. You have economic problems in Poland. A lot of the other countries are laying their foot down. Like enough's enough. We're not in this together. Just because one of you wants to support somewhere doesn't mean everybody has to.
Yeah.
That's I think where I think BRICS has started. Why the Brits left is like the Brits literally built the idea of the European Union post World War II. They're one of the key founding pieces of it, and they're the first ones to say like, yeah, we're out of here.
Yeah.
Somebody should
Yeah.
probably wait a minute. The guy that built the business is leaving the business. Something's not right.
Yeah.
Like, so
Yeah, I
this
was that was a curious move. I don't know a whole lot about the politics in that, but it was kind of funny.
no, and I haven't researched enough of it and really endeavored into it, and I don't like it's to me it just is enough where there's a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of, if you look at news at individual countries throughout the European Union, there's a lot of problems with each other,
Yeah.
but you don't see this being advertised. So there's a big mute button on media, and this is the same in Ukraine. The Ukraine media, it tells the world, it tells the Ukrainians like the whole world's behind them, everybody's there for you. But if you listen to the media here, like the support for Ukraine is getting very, very low, both
Mm,
from our like population and from politically. So
yep.
it's I
Well,
don't know.
but there's a thing here, right? And I think it's fantastic that we're helping other countries as Canadians. Okay, I'm not going to take that away. I think we have a country in the shit as well, right? And I think we should maybe work on our own country a little bit, right, to make it better, because it's not doing well. It is truly not doing well.
Yeah, we got that problem in the east. What does that the Quebec area? Like that problem there. That's we got to deal with that.
I'm gonna just shut the fuck up for the rest of the day.
It's like
But you're right.
It's like those Crimean separatists, eh?
Yeah, like the hooligans.
Yeah.
That's like,
But you're
my
totally,
mom's
totally
side of the
correct.
family's from Quebec, so it's funny to me.
Oh boy.
But you're correct. Like there's things that, again, Quebec has no idea that what's going on. Like if we come back to Canada for 2 seconds, like the amount of money that is given by Saskatchewan, Alberta, and BC to the poor province, if you wish, on the coast, Quebec inclusive, no idea. They have no fucking idea. Better than this, they have no idea they don't pay taxes for carbon tax. Meanwhile, in Alberta, we're at the fourth time we're raising the fucking tax now.
It's interesting. I know this kind of gets off from the Ukraine topic, but it's interesting. Well, I'll kind of got an idea to link it together. What I'm thinking is, like, the French were here in Canada actually in the 1500s, right? They first paired up with the Métis, and they were interested in shipping areas like the St. Lawrence, and they were here long before the Brits.
Yep.
And they actually owned a lot more territory than when the Brits. So once they finally came to an agreement with the Brits, that's why Quebec is the only province that runs a federal party at a provincial level, because it gives them an actual provincial voice at a federal level, which is kind of like a loophole in a federal system, because normally in a federal system, every province gets their autonomy, but the federal government ultimately has some oversight to kind of do their own thing. And there's good and bad of that system. But Quebec, by running a federal party at a provincial level that's both provincially and federally represented, gives them the ability to have a say at both houses. And they get to protect themselves a lot. And that's, I don't know why Alberta doesn't have, or why nobody else seems to do this. And maybe this is just the French, that the fact that they're that sneaky from the start, that they've kind of like, listen, we helped build this system. We know how it works, and we know how to make sure to protect our interests. So that same issue happens regionally in Canada, happens in every single country. It happens country versus country in Europe. Everybody is always going to try to protect their interests and make sure that their country and their ability and their people are always going to have some ability to go forward. And now when you go to Ukraine, like you said, you have these separatist regions with Crimea, Luhansk, Donetsk. They're always going to want their own autonomy. So whether we take that territory back and it becomes Ukrainian, they're not going to buy into Ukrainian government, because for us to push the Russians out of Donetsk, unfortunately, we're going to have to completely destroy or destabilize that city. And that's exactly what Russia will do, is they withdraw anyways. So no matter how you look at it, how you go about doing it, Ukraine is going to look like the bully and the problem to all the people that live there. Because in their mind, if Ukraine didn't make a problem to take the territory back, it wouldn't have been destroyed. And I've seen this in many cities, that there's many people that are sympathetic towards the Russian side and say, well, if the Ukrainians would just give it up without a fight, it wouldn't have been destroyed. And that's, in reality, you're like, yeah, you're right. You're probably right. But the country as Ukraine as a whole can't afford that. And the people don't understand that. They don't understand how important every region is to the GDP of a country and how much the government needs that. So then you have Kyiv, for example. It's self-protectionist. It's only looking out for itself. It really doesn't care about anybody else. Zaporizhia is the same thing. These cities have strong mayors and they all protect themselves, and they're all really selfish overall. They're all very much protectionist about their own area. They're not a nationalist country in the same way, because the country's been separated so many times and so many different cultures. You have different with the Cossacks in the south. Like, it goes back to like the 1400s, this argument. You're never going to get a true nationalist population with a blended mixed people, like either the Mongolians, Genghis Khan, you have the Turks that were there. Like, it is so deeply, the Tartars, right, are like a Muslim group in Crimea that are predominantly from the Turkish side.
Hmm.
So they're a completely different ethnicity, different culture, different background, different rights, different ideas. And then everybody comes down to people do what they're incentivized to do. And most of those regions in the east now, all the factories, all the mines are either obsolete or ineffective. And if you're a businessman, you're not going to spend 3 times as much money to destroy and clean up a damaged area from a war versus building just a new factory on clean dirt. So the areas that are damaged and destroyed, and especially with the internal electrical and the plumbing systems that are irreparable, they're never going to be fixed. I don't see anybody ever even interested to fix them. And now, to make something fixed, you need people to fix it. And one thing that Ukraine has very, very low amount of is tradespeople. It's very frowned upon. Only very poor people or uneducated people go into trades. Everybody's been pushed to university. So the tradespeople make very, very little money. There's not many tradespeople. Anybody that did have a certifiable trade at the start of the war that could get out took that and went to Europe, because if you're a plumber and you go work in Europe, you can make a real good living, or in Canada.
Yeah.
And these, you look at, I can see something regional here, for example, like small scale. You look at, Fort McMurray 40 years ago, right? They had to pay people a premium from the East to come here to work for the last, 10, 20 years. They would pay them, they'd fly them here, and they'd pay them extra money to work in our oil and gas areas before the city was developed. Same as now, you still have people, right? To have somebody work in the Northwest Territories on an oil site, you have to pay them extra. You have to incentivize them to leave their home, leave their family, come work for 2 weeks, take a week off, or to work for 3 weeks, take a week off. And they get paid a premium to do so. If you want people to go into Eastern Ukraine, where there's no infrastructure, there's nothing to live, you're going to have to pay a higher premium to bring them to those regions. But there's nothing in those regions that you could offer to bring people. The mines are obsolete. The factories are obsolete. They're mostly destroyed. So I don't see any economic way in the next 20 to 50 years that those areas are going to be booming. Like, because you actually have now a big problem that is post-war, and you see this anywhere where there's been conflict, is you have the youngest generation that is so you look at people in Donetsk. So we're starting the war 2014. So say you had a 10-year-old in 2014 that stayed there with his mother or father, has now had a very, very poor and very narrow education for the last 10 years. The most important years of his life, from 4 to 14, he's been handicapped educationally.
Mhm.
And now, where does that person go, and what do they do for a living when they're 10 years or 12 years behind by the time they're 20? And that's the sad reality. You see that in many of the Middle Eastern countries. You see that in Africa. And you have these people that are grown adults, 25 years old, and they have just no education. So that goes to, like, all they can do is basic things of like labor work, agriculture. And it's like, okay, so you're handicapped a population. It just destroyed. So what, like, Russia's long-term plan, none of those regions they take or want are going to do anything to benefit Russia. That's what I mean. I don't see it. I don't see there's any logical way it makes sense for them to say these are going to be an investment. What I do see it doing is destabilizing Ukraine and causing Ukraine to become subject to internal civil conflict, which allows Russia to take more territory. And the most valuable thing of Ukraine, and this is what I say the basis of the entire war is all about, is the coastline. Because every time you own 1 meter of coastline, you also get to control and tax and tariff the 200 nautical miles from that coastline under the rules of EEZs, exclusive economic zones. So with the Black Sea being very valuable shipping and receiving towards Europe, any country that wants to ship goods to Russia through like from say from near Odessa or from Romania and ship across the Black Sea. They either got to pay Turkey or they're going to have to pay Russia. And the exclusive economic zones are controlling the water. And that's why Crimea was so valuable. Because once you controlled Crimea, you controlled most of the Black Sea's exclusive economic zones. Everybody had to cross through yours or Turkey's. And that the amount of money that you get to pay for that is pretty high, because Europe, unfortunately, is very much dependent on the goods that come out of Iran and out of Russia. And a lot of that shipments come right across the Black Sea.
That's a big question I've always had about ever since this started. And I don't know if there is a good answer, because it's a very difficult and complex thing to try and think of. But it's like, what is Putin's ultimate goal here? What is Russia's? You could say Russia, I guess, but not really, because
It's Moscow. And this is me. If you look at the history, it used to be the Muscovites versus the Ukrainians. Russia was never seen as a state. Most of Russia was just Mongols.
Yeah.
The people of Moscow and St. Petersburg are kind of their own community and their own group. They control a lot.
Yeah. So what is the end goal? Like, if you're scorching the earth and there's nothing left, what is, we got into the conspiracy theory a little bit here, and the whole idea about Russia pushing against this sort of one world forum, the World Economic Forum, the global oligarchy that's coming into place, these central banks that have a lot of authoritarian power over the global market, and Russia is using this as some sort of stage with which to say that they will fight against this sort of global power that's attempting to take over. I don't know if there's any truth to that, but it's like, what other purpose does this serve?
I think people are looking too big scale and too far and too abstract.
Okay.
I think Russia's looking at the 10-yard line. And I think they're willing to adjust and make another move for the next 10-yard line. And I think that comes from the experience of Putin and realizing nothing in life can you plan the whole game. You got to play every time you get the ball. So he's playing based on had the balls in his court right now, and he's playing the cards he has.
Yep.
He knows he knows the other team changes with an election in the U.S. He knows he has to change his tactics. He knows he has to change. So I think he's thinking more small scale and more short term, but with the idea of saying, if I can do, let's think in a toxic way here for a minute. If I want to sabotage a relationship, but I don't want to do it in the most direct way, but I want to do it in the way that I can do something that I'll come out the most furthest ahead. So I'm going to do the things that are, no matter what happens, like no matter what I choose to do, if we're doing martial arts, I don't want to go and dive for one move that if you happen to stop me, you might submit me right directly in return. If we're doing like jiu-jitsu. But if I try for something that's more ambiguous, that like is more general, I'm not going to lose anything. No matter what you do back, I'm still going to make maybe some progress, or at least I'm not going to lose. So he's kind of pressing that idea of like he's sabotaging the relationship of Ukraine and Europe, knowing he's never sabotaging it enough where they're never going to take his oil and gas and they're still dependent on him. He's playing with both hands, and he's doing different things with different hands. And the break point is the fact that, like, say Ukraine economy holds on, right? But Russia still gets to control more territory. It eventually just slowly bleeds Ukraine. And he's like, I can bleed longer than you can bleed. I got more blood. If Ukraine turns around and gives up and quits, Russia's like, okay, perfect. That's just a total win. I'll take it. Right? The probability and chance that even if Ukraine pushes Russia all the way out of the country, Russia's like, well, we still have the drones and the rockets, so we can still harass them and make their life miserable. And as long as we're putting drones and rockets in anywhere, the UN will not allow any reconstruction to happen. You see that in Kherson. So they withdrew from Kherson. They still fucking bombard those regions and those villages with artillery. So nobody can even go in there with demining. We can't even clean the villages. And then they went and blew the dam and flooded it all. So they just know that even if they lose territory, they're willing to destroy it, because then they don't need to hold it. So it becomes not valuable to anybody.
Yeah.
And that's,
if you cannot have it, I cannot have it.
Yeah, it's like a little kid. But sadly, I think whether we intended to or not, I'm saying we as in the West, but you look at Iraq, we did the same thing. You took a functioning society and a functioning country, and now it's just destabilized, and it's to a point now where like it can never get traction, it can never get ahead. So it stopped it from ever being a world power. It never stopped it from being a real threat. And the problem that it is there now is predominantly regional, which means we don't have to worry about it. And that's I'm wondering what Russia is doing is like they can cut the legs out of Ukraine, and then okay, well once we stop this after 4 or 5, maybe 7 years, the next 20 years from Ukraine, I don't even have to worry about them. They'll
Yeah.
never they'll be dependent on us more than we'll ever need them.
Yeah.
And this is the difference of like war used to be about taking territory and owning it, right? You look at Napoleon, you look at Genghis Khan, they took it, they owned that territory. They tried to make money on it. Now war is really used not to take territory, but it's just to make sure that it's not more prosperous than you. And it's really war is like a tool now to fuck with the economy and trigger the economy. And war is just like, it's a small scale tool. And unfortunately, it's very effective.
Yeah.
But the problem now, the further problem with war is it breeds hate. It breeds hate deep. And the generational hate that will be inherited for the next 2 or 3 generations for Ukraine versus Russia will never allow that area, any of those areas, to be at peace. Like you have even families. I've known personal people that their father is in Moscow or they live in Ukraine, and they have since the start of the war, before the war. And they have a family and a wife there and a life, and everything's good. And they talk to their parents in Moscow. Parents won't even speak to them. Own families literally turn on blood over this. So I can't imagine when it comes to generation area versus like just the next generation where it's just people. It's divided indefinitely.
Oh, that's too bad. So
it is. It's very sad.
So this is looking like it's a long-term type of conflict then.
I think so. And I think what they're going to try to do is, this started as a civil conflict, and I won't be surprised to see Russia be sneaky enough to turn it back into a civil conflict, even though their hands will be in it. Right? They'll withdraw from territory, but those areas in those territories will all of a sudden form new militia groups and new rebel movements or new, freedom fighters type thing that want their own sovereignty.
They're gonna have the truckers.
Because you see that what Russia did that in Moldova with Transnistria, right? So Transnistria is a small little country on the side in between Ukraine and Moldova. Most people don't even know it exists, but it's got it's got one of the largest Russian munition storage sites in it, and it's like 5 kilometers over the border from Ukraine. I've got as close as I could to it, and man, the amount of surveillance and Russian stuff there is absurd. You can Google it, and if it's public, it's but you look for Russian military storage site in Transnistria, and it's astronomical. But Russia controls this area called Transnistria, and all they do is just continually just fucking harass Moldova and leverage Moldova as much as they can. So Russia's done this in other places. You look at Georgia, you look at Chechnya. They have certain areas that are kind of like pro-Russian, or they're autonomous. Dagestan. That's Russia's game, and it works. That's the worst fucking part about it is I don't know how to solve that problem when it's an educational problem. When you take away education and you take away the ability for people to grow and think and like actually try to get ahead. And this is like we laugh, we say Russia's superpower is they're just so okay with shit. The people they recruit for the military are so accustomed to so little that even in the middle of a war zone, they're like, it's not this bad, my friend. It's okay,
I get fed. I have vodka. I'm good.
I have vodka. I have gun. I have my friends. Everything okay, my friend. It's like a superpower. Like if you like imagine like it's like you look at convicts or guys in jail, right? Like it's like you have a rich kid, you take away their laptop, they throw a fit. You have a poor kid that has nothing, and you're like, oh, I'm taking something away. They're like, whatever.
Yeah, it's true.
No matter. It's true.
Yeah.
So
yeah. This is also interesting, and I don't know if there's any truth to it at all, but there are some people saying that this has sort of been Russia's idea all along, and that for decades, they have been working to destabilize Western nations in this psychological way, in creating fractures within culture in Western countries by actually implanting Russian operatives and getting them in certain positions of power and authority, and looking at what is the next social justice reform that needs to be empowered, and what's the next ideology that will help to disturb politics and will help to divide and polarize, and that this is actually Russia's long game, and they've been working on it for decades. I don't know if it's true, but I mean, you can see all over that it's like that, right?
So you look at the Russian structure historically, like kind of say post World War II, when they were kind of at the peak of the Soviets.
Yep.
They had the KGB, and they were extremely highly level intelligence, but they didn't share much with the Soviet military. So there's a big conflict between Soviet military commanders and old KGB guys.
Mhm.
Well, there's also a group above the KGB that was called the NKVD. And the NKVD was in-house assassins strictly organized to assassinate other Russians that were cause problems. And it's like it's well documented. And like I'm sure the CIA or everybody else has ever had somebody that they've had to get rid of that's a problem within some of their own circles. I'm sure it's humanity, it's their life. But the fact that the Russians are so forward with that, and they understand that that is just a tool for them, that they're like, if somebody's rippling our system or causing us a problem, we need to get rid of that problem right away. And they're all like on board. Yep, let's do it. And like, there's just different sense of humanity. I don't know if it's a value,
but it's not a bad thing, technically speaking, right?
No, it's really, and it's a moral fluid question. But if you're really looking to build the most dangerous, most powerful team, eventually you're going to have to cut some guys off the team.
Yeah.
Like,
Mhm.
that's the sad reality. And in certain enterprises, there's no way to fire somebody. Unfortunately, in Russia, you see all these, generals and politicians that happen to fall off this 15-story balcony with all their papers. Like, this is a common ironic thing that happens, and it's just like everybody knows what's really going on. Everybody knows that to put all of the Wagner commanders on the plane of Prigozhin leaving Moscow. Well, no, all those commanders would never be on a plane. Like, clearly, those people are dead before they got on the plane. That's my assumption. Like, this is just like absurd to think that that these people are highly intelligent. They're well connected. They're not stupid people. They don't make stupid, careless mistakes like this. Like,
Mhm.
it's just, but our world is like our media and the nonsense that, like, they sell it to people, and people just like naively. It's almost like this blissful ignorance. They're like, oh, okay, that's just, it's very sad. It's unfortunate. That's life.
Yeah.
But they
It's
really,
safer to
it's
believe that.
it's really hard to get people to believe that really humans are very nefarious, and some of us are up to some really dangerous shit. Um, and
Yeah.
you look at like I'm trying to think of like one place that's kind of got an interesting history that had a really bad problem with corruption and stuff is this Singapore, and all of a sudden they just had literally people executed. And like if you look into like how they cleaned up Singapore, it's very clear it was done illegally, but it fixed the country. Now it runs very, very well. It's incredible. So
Or you can do it closer too, man. Like you can look at New York in the 70s. They had a
yeah,
big problem with
the
mafia.
mob used to run like this.
Yeah. And the mafia did that until like there's a group of cops who started to beat up to almost death
Yeah,
mob.
yeah,
And then they would bring them to the limit of the city and say, if you come back, we're going to do that to your family too.
yeah.
And it took like 5 to 7 years in New York in the 70s to clear that off.
Wow.
Right? And they're still present by all means, right?
Yeah.
But
The change. Yeah, you look at. Well, it's Nick. This is really funny. You bring up the mob. So my nickname Teflon came from my run-ins with the court here, and a Crown prosecutor after this cop tried to accuse me of something in 2013. It was dismissed from court. And there's just he's like, this guy's like Teflon Don.
Everything slides off you, eh, buddy?
Everything just slides off.
Yeah.
So it stuck with me, and then it came up again once in Ukraine, just because I was a little resilient and just like put up with shit. And they're like, "Oh, he's like Teflon." Like,
but you did put up with a lot of shit. Like
I do, man.
I'm not just listen to.
Like, and my life, I don't know. I didn't get to plan my life this way, and I just roll with it. Like, and shit happens, and I'm like, all right, let's roll with it. Like, it is what it is.
Yeah, but that's the biggest wisdom teaching point that anybody can learn, right? Because that's the way life is.
It is. Life is nothing what we plan.
No.
Shit happens unexpectedly, and plans change, and you have to be so fluid and adapt and overcome all the time to life, and you just can't be emotionally invested in really anything. You just can't be that much committed to it that it's as if it's you what you need to live. What you need to live is air, water, a functioning brain, organs. Like those are the things you take care of. Those are the things that you work on. Those are the things that you work that are in your control. And it's amazing when you really centralize and internalize so much of the things that we worry about. You realize like it doesn't matter how much life is shit and what's going on. At the end of the day, it's pretty simple day to day, and you just work through it one thing at a time. And sometimes you get a little blessing from somewhere above, sometimes, and sometimes shit just falls off the rails within a warning. So you just you can't really dwell on things. And there's one quote: "Do or don't, but you're going to regret it." And that's what no matter what if you choose to do something or you choose not to do something, there's going to be some regret. You're going to do it, and you're going to go, "I could have fucked up." Like it's just regret is going to happen. Failure is going to happen. Pain's going to happen. Um, and this is really what for me, it's working in a war zone, working in those environments. Um, it's nice where I get to work with guys when I see them start to slide off that rail and they get frazzled or frustrated, and just being there to just try to bring them back to logic just a little bit.
Yeah.
And like it's not made for everybody. I've had guys that were experienced soldiers in other countries, and they've been put in situations in Ukraine and froze up. Like I had a guy write panic attack, and I had to ask him, "Are you hurt? Or are you fucked up?" And he's like, "I'm fucked up." And we had a serious emergency situation happen because our extraction vehicle got hit because they had to sit and wait on an X by an AGS system. So they had to we had to go change the whole plan sheet, everything, and all it was just some dude just panicked,
Hmm.
and it's just totally unforeseen, no issue, no threat, no nothing. And he's like, he even that day, he said, "I don't know what happened." He's like, "But I'm not, I'm done." Like that's what it takes. It just some days it's just, and maybe one day that'll be me. I don't know. I don't have any. I'm not bulletproof. I'm not. I don't suffer from much trauma associated with work, but um, I've approached it mentally from a very different perspective. And I'm a little bit moral. I have a little bit more moral fluidity than a lot of people, and I see humans for more what I've seen them as, and my expectations is very low on the good of people. I think people mean well, but I think when people are put in situations of desperation, they do what they need to do,
Yep.
and
Well,
I don't really hold it over their head or hold it against them. I just I just accept
you're
what.
you're pretty passionate about the psychology of warfare. That was part of what was in your bio. So I
Yeah,
would
it's
imagine you kind of can read between the lines when you're getting deep into that and recognize that sort of everybody's willing in some way to turn into a monster if they have to or if they're pushed, right?
yes, and I think it's capable of every human. Um,
Yeah. That's
and I
what
don't.
Alexander Solzhenitsyn said in the Gulag Archipelago. Like, you can't say that you would never do this. Oh, I would never become an SS Nazi. I would never become
No,
part of the KGB who was going around stealing people out of their houses at night because of their political affiliation and then locking them up in prisons. And yeah, you could. You've just never experienced it, right?
the most humbling and sombering feeling I ever have from any of my experience is I've never ever felt close to a limit of how savage or how bad I could be.
Mm,
And I've had to do some horrible shit, and it doesn't dwell on me, but I just realize I don't think there ever is really a limit if you put a human in a situation where it's life and death, what they're willing to do. Um,
yeah.
and when it's necessary, and in different circumstances require different tools, different thought process. But to ever say "Oh, I'll do this but I won't do this," no, every place and every decision I make comes from a place of conscience. It's very much a deliberate and a critical decision, and I almost weigh in is it necessary? And that's usually my threshold test. If it's necessary, the answer is yes. If it's necessary, really there's no limit. If it's necessary, we're doing it.
Yeah.
And there's hard decisions to make sometimes with that. There's some really ugly ones that are impossible. Like you said, do or don't, but you're going to regret it. And
Yeah.
that's those necessary decisions have regret every time.
Yeah. Everything kind of has a cost, right? There's nothing
Everything.
you get away with. So
No.
yeah.
So,
John, what are you thinking, man? We're at 2 hours here. I'd kind of like to get some final thoughts from you, Keenan, about what to expect and what we should be thinking about when we're, as regular citizens, looking in on this and not really knowing a whole lot.
I think the world needs to be a little bit more sympathetic more than empathetic with Ukraine, because I don't think anybody can fucking relate to anything where they're coming from, a different culture, different idea, different basis. You need to just be a very, very low level of humanity, of saying, like, I'm going to accept you at your very worst, and try to work with you. Because Ukrainians are coming from a place of some animosity to the world, and that's, not by their own fault, but by their own negligence. They've bred this problem with years of miseducation, with years of lack of investigation. They've been set up for failure, and now as their country starts to fall apart, and those people need somewhere to go, and there's a lot of them here. They need somebody to help bridge that and say, like, listen, I don't understand everything you've been through, but I'm going to try to work with you to get you to a point where we can function together. Because when you start to see them, you take a person that's been through what they've been through and you divide that further, it only makes the problem worse.
Yeah.
And there's no way to get on the same level as with them. But I think that for them helps them change easier than when they feel in opposition to anything. So, and the people that are still in Ukraine that are not doing the things they want, I think the world needs to be more supportive in the way of understanding and trying to figure out how to tell their people and update their people, the media per se, the funding and the support and why it's being held up, and actually educate like the world on why they're holding up why they're holding up the support and the aid, because of other people have their own problems and other things. And this is eventually going to be the beginning of the end of Ukraine as we know it. I think that's the sad reality, is because anytime you have the head of the country, the president, starting to change the head of the military and all the other senior commanders, you just can't change so much so quickly. And especially no matter who you put in command, the next foreseeable months, there's definitely no progress to be made. It doesn't matter what. So they just don't have the equipment, they don't have the men, they don't have the training. So the next commanders in the next 6 months, there's no way for them to logically make any progress anyways. But the problem when you go as a senior leader, what Zelensky in his position, is he's just given responsibility to all these other commanders now that they have a job to do better than the last commander, which puts all of the Ukrainian soldiers in unnecessary risk, with inadequate support, with inadequate logistics, because all those commanders are going to be afraid now. Once they've started that ripple of somebody's losing their job if they don't do what I want, or they're not being successful, you're incentivizing all those commanders to be successful. And if you're saying if the recipe isn't there and the ingredients aren't there to be successful, the unsuccessful level of that comes at the cost of human lives, and a lot of them. So that scares the hell out of me in relation to the next foreseeable months, is that I don't know how long that goes on before the people finally say, the person that we want to change is you, not all our military commanders. And now that you've removed Zelensky, he's got more support in that country than the president. It would take one tweet from him to turn that country inside out. That's a dangerous thing to have, that man, and that with that much power, that he could cause turmoil with just a tweet. Like it's and that's how fragile the country's in. So I'm not optimistic in relation to the way that Ukraine handles the next 6 months. I don't see Russia taking a whole bunch more territory, and I don't see Ukraine doing much either. But I see a lot of losses, and I see a lot of frustration, and a lot of people starting to turn on their own people and their own government, and just become a lot of animosity amongst each other. Who gets mobilized, who doesn't? Nobody knows what's fair. They're not telling anybody, we're going to mobilize 450,000 people. But you could be in a house with 3 brothers, and all of a sudden you're the one guy that gets mobilized. They didn't get the message. And you're like, why the fuck me? I don't want to go. Like, even if there's somebody that maybe, one of your other brothers is more fit or more, in a better position to. Like, you could be there with 2 kids and your brother's single, but all of a sudden they're going to mobilize you instead because they sent it to your account. And it's just, those are where I see the interpersonal stuff starting to really cause problems, because unfortunately, I think, I don't know, maybe you look, certain cultures, they just have certain more internal conflict in families, and they're more triggered to have internal conflict in families. And I see that in Eastern Europe. I see that in Poland. I see that in Slovakia. They're just, if there's something wrong with a family or somebody gets ahead of somebody else or gets worse, they don't, they're not, they're a bit jealous or envious, I guess, I think. So I'm scared of, that's my biggest fear, is how it starts to divide. You see, like I just explained, with parents even just, disowning and separating from their own kids over this war in relation to Russia and Ukraine. Just imagine how 2 brothers turn on each other if one has to go to the war and the other one doesn't, or vice versa. And it's, those are the problems that nobody should have to suffer with, and nobody should ever have to explain. And I really don't think 450,000 or 500,000 more guys is going to fix the war or going to change anything, because you need strategy, you need long term, and that's not the strategy you need. Doesn't need any more men. It needs more leadership. It needs more management. It needs more logistics. It needs to re-educate the way the Mujahideen beat the Russians, of saying, like, we're going to let you go ahead and stay in Afghanistan for 10 years, 20 years. I don't care. As long as you're here, we'll hunt you and kill you. And eventually it just is like not feasible or economically advantageous for Russia to sit and do it. So eventually you got to play that humanitarian card, or that geopolitical card, where the people that in those areas where Russia controls all of a sudden aren't getting the bullshit that they've been promised. And it's your job to ensure that they don't get the things that they've been promised. It's your job to try to cause that problem so that those people start to turn on the enemy. And you have to divide your enemy if you want to defeat your enemy. It's been well documented. And to fight the enemy head on by force when you're just undersized, it's senseless. And then to give that to a commander, you give 500,000 young men to a commander that's literally known as General 200, that gets men killed by, you call him the butcher. It's the worst recipe for disaster I could ever imagine.
Jeez.
It's shit. And I'm like, I still have a lot of really close friends, and I'm back in 3 weeks, and there's a lot of guys looking for unit transfers or transferring to different units because they're just terrified. And once you put fear in relation to your people or your soldiers, they're never going to operate, right? They're never going to be as capable. If you have a cop and you want him to work alone in an area that's totally remote, where 4 or 5 other cops went missing, he is not going to be the most confident, competent person when he walks out in those areas.
Yeah,
that's just psychology of anybody. Is that if you are not confident walking into a fight, there's a good chance you're not going to win it. And fear is a real thing. And there's a difference between fear and trauma, and fear and actual risk. And when you have risk and fear combined, it's paralyzing. You have a real situation.
Fear will cause trauma.
Yeah, and that's what happens, and that's what I mean. So if you actually have something that's a quantifiable risk, you can accept it, you can address it, you can mitigate it. But the second that you put fear in front of that risk, it makes all those coping skills, everything else, almost irrelevant. People freeze.
Yep. Well,
And it's
literally.
literally.
Shuts off our brain. It actually just shuts off
your
the
body's like,
thinking brain.
I safety wise, I know this is risk. I have to prevent. The survival mode kicks in.
Yeah.
And then fear kicks in. And if you can't rationalize and actually address the fear, you can't move forward. You can't make logical. You can't make critical decisions. You can't think properly.
Yeah.
And that's, I think, that is the poison to any cop or military or any operator or anybody in the sport, is the second that they have fear. You look at a team when they're, worried of losing, and all of a sudden they start playing in a way to not lose. They're no longer fighting or playing to win. They're just playing not to lose. And that's what I find Ukraine's doing for the last months is they're in it, but the strategy's not there to do anything productive.
They're not trying to win the Super Bowl. They're just trying not to lose their end zone, basically.
That's it. but at the same time, they're still getting field goals scored against them. Like
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
like that's kind of the analogy. You're like, yeah, okay, you're not being embarrassed, but how long can you drag this game on?
Yeah.
And eventually in a fight, you eventually have to fight back. And if you don't have the ability to fight back, I don't know what else to do other than figure out some other way to fight back, which is economics, humanitarian stuff. You got to get tenacious.
Yeah. I guess if there's no offense, you can't play defense forever because you just
No,
run out of room, right?
yeah, you just can't.
Yeah.
And you just run out of resources.
Yeah.
And if you're already in a bad position defensively, to think about going on offense, if offense is going to cost you 300% more resources and lives and equipment.
Hmm.
You seen that last year with the counteroffensive in the South. They literally lost 9 Bradley fighting vehicles and 3 Leopards, I think, in the first day. Like, just they lost 30% of the equipment they were given in a few hours.
Mm.
So,
Hmm.
and you look at live UA map or deep state map for Ukraine, and you look at the months and months and months they spent, and they gained like a few kilometers. It's just like, at what cost? For what? Like, and at what point do you just stop and you're like, okay, like, at some point, if you're trying to take the hottest girl home from the bar and she just says no over and over, eventually, like, you're just gonna have to say, like, maybe I should try something else, or maybe I should just stop trying.
Yeah.
Like, like
Yeah.
at some point, you have to process and accept rejection or failure. Like,
Mhm.
And learn from it.
yeah, like you really, and then not try the same way, the same time, the next day with the same girl. Like, you're gonna have to get a little more creative.
Yeah. The definition of insanity, right? Doing the same
Really,
thing and expecting
that's
different results.
yeah, and
Yeah.
that's very much Soviet the older Soviet commanders
Yeah.
is very much insanity.
Yeah. Just keep
That's awesome.
running at the brick wall with your head until your head breaks or the wall breaks.
Yeah,
It's
just
always your head.
you're never gonna win.
Yeah. Keenan, thank you, man. That
Yeah.
most people have no idea just how crazy it is over there, how complex it is, how unorganized it is. I had no idea. This is the
Yeah.
most information I've heard about this.
Well, this is, and I said I wanted to focus on John. I don't want to talk about war stories. I don't want to put my helmet on. Yeah, like I've been in my shit, and it is what it is. But um, there's a much deeper, realer problem to deal with. And the work stuff, like yeah, it's just not my thing. Like the pictures, the war stories, like it's just work, and every fucking day's a mess. And I don't have any expectations whatsoever. Every day I go out and operate. Every day I have to go teach or do something. It's unforeseen, unexpected all the time. So you just take it as it comes and roll with it. And every time you're in a situation, you just know damn well it can give you worse.
Yeah.
So
But I think with that mentality in general in life, you go further.
I think so. I think, and that's honest. I think that's where um, why I was able to operate for 18 months straight, and I didn't really feel burnt out or exhausted or stressed or overdone by it. Is I just treated it like a job, like work. Um, Normalized what was normal at the time. And then when I came home and I seen my kids and everything else was here, like I still sleep like a baby. I don't have any, the thing that frustrates me, the thing that angers me or irritates me is the economic and the political stuff, because that's stuff that's actually controllable and stuff that people could do something about, and they're not.
Yeah.
Mhm.
That's what's the most frustrating, is like things that could be changed, things that could be made better, and the negligence and carelessness to not do it.
Blinders.
Yeah, or by just your willful ignorance.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's classic.
So
West,
let's make
West
a deal here. I'm gonna cut you off my turn, Jason.
Yeah.
When you come back, we're doing another one of this
Okay.
to have an update on what's going on there, but how you're going through this as well.
Yes.
Because obviously at 18 months, and I don't know how long you're gonna be gone again. Maybe another 18.
Yeah, I took when it was 18 months, and then I took about 4 months off.
Yeah.
And
So-
I've just been this last couple weeks. I've really been back to the range lots and just getting my reps in and just start shake the chains a little bit and just get moving and just put my head in the back space. And it's different from target shooting to when you put your front post on a target or when you put your sight on a target and you're intending on, like, you need to make that shot. It's life and death.
Yeah.
It changes the way I train. It changes the way I practice. And it just, I feel automatically, my demeanor, my mood is more calm. It's more settled. It gets a little bit more cold. That's one of the things I notice. It's a mindset switch.
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
is
We'd love
needed.
to have you back on, man. And we'd love to have an update when you can.
Yeah, we'll stay in touch when I'm over. I'll,
Yeah.
like I said, I foresee the next months actually being really quiet, and I'm gonna dedicate as much as I can into working with training and working with the guys. But there's also going to be a lot of work with the guys of trying to help them mentally and healthily and try to get them back. Like the big thing is getting the guys once they're on their downtime is really getting the guys to the gym and training and working and like processing things the right way. There's a lot of guys that I watch guys that with it's culturally, oh, we'll just go drink, go to the bar, we'll go get some drinks. And it's like this isn't how you decompress. This isn't how you deal with this job.
Mhm.
That shit will haunt you and that shit will catch up to you and it will eat you alive.
Yeah.
And so it's a big part of why me trying to work with the guys over there. And a lot of them lacked good parenting. And I'm blessed that I had two incredible parents and like the life experience I have. And I'm always hearing dad's voice in my head. And like over there, I hear some of these guys and they lose their cool. And I'm just like, I just wish you could have had my father. That's what I genuinely wish. Like
Yeah.
you would not be having these problems in life or this thought process if you had some other leadership better.
All right, man.
Thank you
I
so much.
Hey, this is the longest guest recording we've had, Keenan. So right on. You win.
all right.
You
Chat
win.
too much. Thank you.
Oh, no, it was great.
No, it's
I
great.
appreciate
Yeah.
it.
All right. Take care, guys.
Yeah.
Well,
See you.
thank you, man.